I went to a bar with a couple friends one Saturday night. We got really drunk and eventually all spread out throughout the bar as we went to talk to different people. Long story short, I was having a bad night, and I wasn't feeling the whole bar scene really. I called an Uber home, which was about 15 minutes away. The Uber pulled up, but instead some old, crappy-looking 2003 or something Honda Accord pulls up in front of the bar. I knocked on the window and asked, "Mike?" He nodded, so I got in the passenger seat, only because the front seat was covered with books and other stuff that appeared to be junk. In fact, the entire car was messy, the back seats too. He didn't seem like the kind of Uber driver to joke around and make conversation with. He was on the older side, not that old, but his hair was thinning, and based on what I could see of his face, he looked kind of unfriendly. So I kept silent. I was pretty drunk though, so I barely remember what I was doing, probably drunk texting people and whatnot. I'm telling you, I was blackout drunk because I don't remember even getting out of the car. All I really remember is waking up the next morning and realizing my phone was missing. I checked everywhere. I practically turned my whole room upside down looking for it. Eventually, after hours of searching, I came to the unfortunate acceptance that I must have lost my phone the night before. I had my brother text all my friends asking if they had my phone. All of them said no. Then I remembered I recently activated Find My iPhone. I excitedly told my brother to track my phone using the Find My iPhone app. Sure enough, my iPhone came up on the map. It was a few miles away, on the much worse side of town, the part of town everyone knew not to go to. My brother agreed to come with me, not only to help track the phone, but to serve as backup if needed. We pulled up to what appeared to be the house that the iPhone on the map was sitting over. It was a small box-like house. 2 windows in front, 1 window on the upper level. It was either 8 or 9 p.m., still early, so my brother and I went ahead and rang the doorbell. It didn't seem like the bell worked though, so I knocked really hard on the door. We could actually hear footsteps on a creaky wood floor approaching the front door, then silence. There was a peephole in the door, so I had a feeling someone was watching us through it at that very moment. After an uncomfortably long silence, the door cracked open and someone asked who it is in a very raspy, almost familiar voice. We mentioned the lost iPhone situation. At first he played dumb, but when I turned to the driveway and recognized the old Honda Accord, I called him out for being my Uber driver and that I must have dropped my phone in his car. At this point he opened the door fully and revealed himself to indeed be my Uber driver. Now he acted like he remembered, but his whole persona and everything was disturbing. He clearly didn't know what social cues were, or forget that, he clearly just didn't know what social skills were. He told us to come in and shut the door behind us. Then he told us to wait there while he went upstairs to find my phone. I thanked him, and as creepy as the guy was, I felt relieved that I'd be getting my phone back. My brother and I stood in the tiny hallway of this man's tiny house. It was so archaic inside. The finishing, the design, everything. The floral wallpaper covering all of the walls looked like it belonged in a house built in the 1930s. The stairs that the man walked up were creaky and sounded like they were ready to collapse. We heard the man walking around upstairs for a bit. The creakiness followed his every step until we heard him stop directly overhead. My brother and I patiently played the waiting game, with my checking my watch every minute or so. He seemed to be up there for a total of 10 minutes. My brother and I got so impatient at this point that we started calling up the stairs asking the man if he needed help. We heard a slight creak in the floor right above us again, but he didn't call back. My brother told me to go upstairs and check if he needed help, so I hesitantly did. As I got halfway up the stairs, I realized it was insanely dark up there, which made me wonder how he could even possibly be looking for my phone. I got to the top. There seemed to be 3 open doors, one leading to a bathroom, the other 2 leading to bedrooms. All the lights were off except for a little hallway nightlight. I called out for the man again, to no avail. I called down the stairs to my brother, saying that all the lights were off and something wasn't right. He didn't answer for some reason. I checked the bathroom, empty. I was about to check one of the bedrooms, passing the door to the bathroom, but I stopped when I saw something through the crack of the bathroom door. The man, he was hiding behind the door, holding something in his hand. I felt like he was looking at me, but I didn't look for more than a second. I looked away and pretended I didn't notice. I had to get downstairs ASAP. I nervously called out to the man that I'd be going downstairs and that I'd be right back. I walked with a certain speed and jumped my step right to the stairs, at which point I booked it and screamed for my brother to follow me. My brother emerged from one of the other rooms downstairs after apparently snooping around, and without questioning it, followed me outside to the car. We drove down the block as I explained in full what happened. The next thing we did was dial 911 for the police. An officer showed up to the house where we returned, showed the officer the Find My iPhone app screen, and knocked on the door with the officer. The man would eventually answer, and the officer forced the man to fetch the phone. This time he did without hesitation. He went up the stairs and 10 seconds later came back down. My brother and I begged the officer to arrest him or do something, given that he looked as if he were waiting to strike me as he was behind that door. The officer said there was nothing he could do though, and I swear as I said this, the Uber driver looked at me with the most disgusting, disturbing, and evil stare I'd ever seen. I gave him the middle finger and turned away as we left the house, which felt good slightly, but I still get scared thinking about seeing that man behind that door, very clearly holding something in his hand, most likely waiting to attack me if I were to see him. Before I got an iPhone 10, I used to have an iPhone 7. I was perfectly fine with that phone and I never got a scratch on it. I'd probably still have that phone now if I didn't lose it. I always had the Find My iPhone feature enabled, however, just in case if I did lose it, I'd be able to track it. To this day, I still don't remember how or where I lost the phone. All I remember is I came home one day, quickly realized I didn't have my phone on me, and had a mini heart attack. I searched the whole house, my car, the pathway up to the house. I even drove back to all the locations I was in that night to look for it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. Then I remembered I could sign into my iCloud account from my laptop and track my iPhone using the Find My iPhone setting. So I drove home and did just that. Apparently my phone was coming up somewhere in the woods at the end of the village. None of my siblings were home at the time. They were all away at school, so I couldn't ask any of them to come with me. So it looked like I was heading out alone. My dad didn't want me to come because he had work early the next morning, but he let me take his phone with me to track my phone. It was a quick 5 to 10 minute drive to the woods. I parked on the grass on the side of the road. It seemed like I was maybe a minute walk north away. Obviously I brought my flashlight expecting to be following the trail into the woods. Now that I stood there though, the idea of going in there was a lot less appealing. In fact, the whole situation seemed more suspicious, such as why whoever found my phone would be in the middle of the dark woods at 10 o'clock. I definitely shouldn't have come alone, but at this point I didn't see much more of a choice than following the trail. The flashlight I had sucked. It barely lit up the trail 5 feet in front of me. Eventually it seemed like I was right on the mark of the location for my phone. I did a full 360 examining my surroundings, but seeing nothing but darkness and trees. I started yelling for somebody to come out. It was the first time I heard my own voice in an hour, and it came out weak and unintimidating. When I called out, I heard a whispering come from beyond a few trees, in the east direction on my map. I yelled out again. Silence this time now. I started sending texts with my dad's phone to my phone, and I heard the dings coming from the same direction as the whispering. I looked in that direction and saw the glow of a phone screen so bright that it lit up the figures of 2, maybe 3 men standing behind a line of trees. At that exact moment, I had a realization in my head that I was in way over my head being in those woods alone, and that my iPhone was in no way worth risking my life. I turned the flashlight off and ran back down the trail as fast as I could, back to my car. By the time I got back, my phone could no longer be located on the Find My iPhone app, meaning it was either broken, disconnected, or turned off. I have checked a few times since then if the phone comes up on the map. It never has though. I think I made the right choice running away. I don't think any possession would be worth approaching a group of people like that in the woods. I recently lost my iPhone. It was a 5C, a really old one. I was due for another one anyway, but let me tell you the story of how I lost it. I had admittedly been drinking one night on the weekends, and at some point in the night I lost my phone. Later on in the night, when my friends and I sobered up a bit, I asked one of my friends to let me use their phone to track mine using the Find My iPhone thing. It wasn't too far actually, only a mile away from us, but that meant someone took my phone. My friend Ryan and I took a drive to this abandoned warehouse building. Of course, it had to be an abandoned building. We found a way inside, with only Rye's phone flashlight to use for navigation. The place was cold, full with trash and rubble, and every little sound created an echo. We heard yelling coming from upstairs, from what sounded like two people. Ryan and I figured one of them had to have my phone, so still, with a slight amount of liquid confidence in us, we found a stairway that led to the next level. We came to a hallway, which was disturbingly silent. The only thing to break the silence was a bang from a nearby locker room type area. Ryan and I both tried hard to make our presence known so that we wouldn't surprise any potentially dangerous people. We entered this kind of changing room area, or whatever it was, but it had a bunch of lockers. No one was in the room. Rye started checking the lockers out of desperation, which made a lot of noise, I guess, because we heard a deep voice from another room call us over and said that they had what we were looking for. I was about to walk into the adjacent room, but Rye put his hand on my shoulder to stop me and put his finger on his lips as he went, "Shh." He was doing something on his phone. I didn't know what until I heard my ringtone and the vibration of my phone coming from one of the lockers. There were too many to distinguish quick enough which one it could be. I started checking the ones where the sound could have been coming from before Rye pulled me by the arm and told me, "Let's go." I told him, "Wait, let me get my phone first," but he kept saying, "No, let's go." By the time we got to the car, we had a long discussion about what was going down in there, or what was about to go down. Rye was positive we were walking straight into a trap. How he was so sure was because as I was checking the lockers for my phone, he spotted someone's head behind one of the walls to the adjacent room. They were peering their head in just barely, making it obvious they were hiding and had questionable intentions. It wasn't the end of the world. It was an old iPhone that wouldn't have been worth much anyway. It was much better to escape with our wallets, or even our lives instead. With all this quarantining madness going on because of COVID-19, my family and I have fled New York State to our Massachusetts lake house to avoid contact with other people. The lake, which I will not name for safety reasons, has a bunch of houses surrounding it, and in the summer months it's full of boats and people barbecuing and drinking. But right now, in late March when I'm writing this, it's kind of a ghost town here, and it's weird seeing it like this here. Anyway, I wouldn't be here writing this if something didn't go wrong, right? My younger brothers, who I'll call Steve and Glenn, were out on the deck overlooking the lake with me. We were setting up the table for a game of beer pong, which we invited our dad to play with us so the teams would be even. The sky had reached that point after sunset where most of the sky was dark, but there was still that hint of orange on the horizon. The lake was calm and quiet, not a single boat, and all the neighboring houses seemed to be vacant. We're truly the only ones around still. Our deck has a fire pit, so we lit that for extra light as well as heat because it was chilly. The four of us were playing a game of beer pong, when in the middle of it, Glenn grabbed his phone and lowered the music to his portable speaker. He and Steve turned around to look over the deck to the grass below. My dad and I went over to see what they were looking at. Glenn said he heard something below us, and he could see someone walk under the deck. The deck doesn't have a stairway leading down. You have to go inside and downstairs to get down there. So my dad and I went downstairs and out the back door under the deck. There was nobody there. My dad called out a bunch of times to confirm this, and we went back upstairs. The thing is, Steve swore by it as well that he also heard someone speaking from under the deck. Regardless, we cut the game of beer pong short and went inside, making sure to lock the door. My mom and dad were up in their loft bedroom, while I was in the living room playing PlayStation. That's when it started. Loud, aggressive bangs on the sliding door. Accompanied with the bangs was a man's shrieks and screams. Sounded like he was screaming for help. The curtain to the door was shut, so I couldn't see who it was, but apparently everyone in the house heard it, because my brothers and parents came rushing to the living room. My dad yanked the curtain open to find himself face to face with some red-in-the-face man banging his fist on the glass, begging to be let in. He was claiming he was hurt and needed help. My dad asked, "Where are you hurt?" He didn't answer that though. He just kept repeating, "Let me in, I'm hurt." My dad then yelled to get out of here before we'd call the cops. He yanked the blinds shut and told us all to shut and lock our windows if they were open. We all stayed in the living room together for a couple hours, just to be safe. We had a movie on in the background as we talked, but eventually, with no other uninvited visitors outside, we all split off into our respective rooms for the night. I was browsing YouTube videos in my bed when it happened. The crash of shattering glass so loud it made me jump out of my bed. My heart instantly started racing. I didn't know if I was the only one who heard it because I didn't hear my parents or brothers running out of their rooms. I picked up the phone and called my dad's cell. He picked up and whispered he heard it too, and to stay in my room and lock the door. I reminded him my door didn't have a lock. Of course, my room, while the biggest of my brothers, was the one room that didn't have a lock. He told me to hide in the closet and call my brothers while he called the cops. I heard footsteps outside my room in the living room area. I tiptoed to my closet and did my best to quietly open and close the door, but the damn hinges just had to squeak. I sat behind a big plastic bag and texted my brothers, who also heard the noise and each locked their doors. It was the most tense moment of my life in that closet. The bedroom door opened, and I could see through the strips in the closet door someone walk to my bed and sit at the edge of it. He then took off one of his shoes and started shaking it, as if to get something out of his shoe. He put his shoe back on, then his head actually turned to look at the closet door. I felt as though he was looking at me. There was just this silence for the longest time, until he finally spoke, saying, "I know you're in there. I'm sure your family already called the cops. I'm not sure what my next course of action should be." At that moment, I had to decide whether to stay in there or make a break for the door, and I chose the second option. I burst through the closet door screaming as some kind of adrenaline boost. I made it to the door, expecting him to lunge for me and grab me, but he didn't. I ran up to my parents' loft and banged on the door. My dad opened it and let me in. I waited with them until the cops entered through the freshly broken back door. Then we left the room to meet them. The man who was sitting on my bed was no longer in the house. We checked every closet, under every bed, every little crevice of the house. The cops recommended we tape a bunch of garbage bags over the door and shut the curtain, and also that we stay awake for the night. My dad stayed in the living room the whole night, and first thing in the morning, he ran to Home Depot to buy a glass pane to fix the door. We're still actively quarantining in this house a week later. I'll send updates if the man returns. I've been staying in my apartment in Jersey City during this coronavirus epidemic. My roommate has since gone home to Ohio to stay with her family during all of this, so I've been in the apartment alone. I've been mostly just watching new movies and shows. I try not to go out too much because my city is pretty bad right now. A couple days ago, I was running extremely low on food, so I had to make a mandatory grocery run. I went to the nearby Trader Joe's wearing a mask and gloves, which, including the insane line and limited stock, turned out to be a production. On my walk home in the dark, I realized the streets were even quieter than they were the last time I went shopping, just a week before. Suddenly, out from an alleyway, some guy wearing a mask and gloves approached me. He had a baby wrapped in a hoodie and small blanket in his hands. He seemed very sincere in asking me to let him take his son to my apartment real quick so he could change his diaper and feed him his food. He swore to me that he was clean, and that he really needed this favor for just 5 minutes, that it was an emergency. Hearing the baby's little cries, and the fact that this man even had a child with him and just seemed sincere, the soft part of me agreed. I led him to my apartment building. It was only a short walk from there. We walked up the 3 stories to my apartment, and I led him inside, asking him to close the door behind him. I cleared a spot on the living room table for him to change his child's diaper and whatever. When I turned around, the man was like pacing around, or more like snooping around, I guess. He went into my kitchen to do God knows what. I called over to him that I set up the table for him to use. He didn't answer. I started getting confused. I walked to the kitchen and saw him looking around suspiciously, and what else I saw confused me. The man was standing with what I thought was his child, held in only one hand. It took me a second to understand. It wasn't a child. It was just some baby doll wrapped up in a blanket. I'm assuming one of those realistic ones that make the crying and moaning noises. The man looked at me and pulled out a gun from his right pocket. That's where things went from 1 to 100 real quick. He looked at me with a gun aimed at me and said something along the lines of, "I'm gonna take what I want and you're gonna stay in my sight." Of course, I had to say okay with a gun aimed at my head. I wondered if it could be a BB gun with a tip painted black, but even if it was, I doubted I could overpower him. I couldn't risk it. The man pulled out a big black bag from his backpack and filled it with valuables, including my wallet, some of my roommate's jewelry, kitchen valuables, my brother's Xbox which he lent me, and my iPad. It was sickening to watch, but I was the most scared of him pulling the trigger of that gun. He filled his bag and threw the fake baby in it as well, then he left. I called the cops first thing. They came and helped me in contacting the building owner to see the CCTV footage from the halls. Of course, upon seeing the footage, it didn't help much. The man's face was covered by a mask, making it near impossible to even discover who he was. All I can do is urge everyone to be careful, not to trust anyone, and stay indoors until all of this is over. The past month, I've been quarantining in my apartment alone with minimal outside contact because of the virus. My apartment is the downstairs floor of a 2-family house. The upstairs occupant isn't the landlord, he's just another tenant. I'm actually decently acquainted with the guy. His name's Rico. To be honest, he's a bit odd though. Of course, I hadn't seen Rico because I've been quarantining. I do still have to wake up early in the morning though for work, which I report to on my laptop now. A week ago, Rico started making a lot of noise one night. Late night, actually. I was in bed. It was like past 12. I had to be up early. And all of a sudden, I just start hearing constant thumping noises coming from the upstairs level of the house. It sounded like Rico was stomping around in boots or something. I waited for it to hopefully end eventually, but it just kept going on and on and on. Over 20 minutes of the stomping. I was so frustrated that I got up to knock on his door outside. I knocked a few times loud enough for him to hear. He never answered. When I gave up and went back to my room though, thankfully the noise had stopped. I wasn't sure if he heard my knocks and stopped because of that or what, but I didn't care much. I fell into a deep sleep for some time, till I awoke in my dark bedroom. The clock read 2:30 something. I didn't know what exactly woke me up at first. Then I realized it must have been the fact that the room was cold. And I realized my window on the opposite side of the room was open about a foot. I knew for a fact I did not do that. I got up and quietly shut it, looking around my room paranoid. I checked under my bed and in the closet. No one there. It's not like anyone could fit through that opening in the window, but someone actually went out of their way to open that, and that terrified me. I did a scope of the place with all the lights on, and I could confirm there was nobody hiding inside, so I went back to bed with one eye open. Then the noises upstairs started again, thumping and stomping, I couldn't take this anymore. It almost sounded like he was hitting the floor with a hammer or something. I went up to his door again and pounded on it, yelling his name as well. Once again, no answer. I went back inside and grabbed my phone and dug deep for Rico's number. I didn't have it saved. It was buried in my text conversations somewhere. When I found it, I called him. He didn't pick up the first time or the second, but on the third time, he picked up sounding confused and like he had just been woken up. I said in a rather annoyed tone that he needed to stop making the constant noises. He asked what I'm talking about, and I explained the thumping noises. Then he dropped the bomb and told me, "Jared, I'm not in my apartment. I went home to stay with my family a week ago. Call the cops." It suddenly made a lot more sense, and I realized the noises had stopped ever since I went back to the door. I hung up before saying another word and dialed 911, not wasting a second. As I was on the phone talking to the police operator, I heard it clicking at my bedroom window. Someone was outside trying to lift open the window, which I had just locked earlier. I screamed as I realized it, and then yelled at the operator to hurry with the police. She said they were on their way and asked me to describe the man, but I couldn't. It was too dark. He seemed to hear my conversation, I would guess, and walked away from the window. 4 police officers showed up. I led them to the upstairs apartment where the door was unlocked. I walked in behind the officers, and not much searching needed to be done. There was a man with long graying hair down to his shoulders who was sitting on the couch looking up at the ceiling, seemingly laughing. When the officers approached him to arrest him, the man focused in on me, still laughing. He started to point at me, and that's when I had to leave because I was too freaked out. I waited until the man was in one of the police cars before talking to the officers again. I locked Rico's door, and the cops just told me to keep a good eye on the place for the time being. Rico came back the following day to assess what was stolen. He has been staying upstairs since. When I was 18, I was a babysitter for 3 young boys across town from me. They were 3, 5, and 7. I'll just call them Adam, 3, Bobby, 5, and Chris, 7, ABC. Adam and Chris were the easiest to take care of. Adam was a surprisingly well-behaved toddler, and Chris just liked to play his video games and watch TV. Bobby, on the other hand, was very moody, a picky eater, and difficult to get to go to sleep. I had worked for this family for months, and I was somewhat close with their mom Lucy, who was raising them by herself. They had a decently modest middle-class house. Lucy's parents would help her out with finances and such. All 3 boys had their own rooms. Lucy worked nights at the time, so I'd always babysit till around midnight on weeknights, and my college classes would start in the afternoon, so it worked out schedule and sleep-wise. One night after playing some Nintendo Wii games with Chris, I put Adam to bed, and not long after, Bobby. Chris's bedtime would be 9:30, Bobby's would be 9. After tucking Bobby in, I started telling Chris to start changing into his PJs after his next game was over. Chris insisted I play one more game of Wii tennis with him, so I made a deal that he'd go to bed after if I did. During our game though, Bobby started crying for me up from his room. I paused the game and went upstairs. As I entered his room, he said there's a monster in his closet. I laughed, and I believe I pinched his cheek and said something along the lines of, "There's no such thing as monsters, but I'll leave the door open so you feel safer." Then I asked if that made him feel better, and he nodded. Chris was downstairs calling for me to come back, all annoyed, so I went back to the game of tennis and we resumed, and we eventually finished the game with no interruptions. At this point, Chris went upstairs to change into his pajamas and brush his teeth, and I was alone in the kitchen watching TV. That's when Bobby's cries from upstairs echoed down again. I went up to his room again, and he was hiding under his covers. He said once again, "There's a monster in the closet, I heard it." I looked at the closet door, which was closed. I looked at it for a while actually, then back at Bobby and asked, "Why do you think there's a monster in there?" And he replied, "I keep hearing it moving." I asked him if he wanted me to take a look, and he shook his head no. I walked closer to the closet anyway, and he said don't. I didn't take him seriously, till I heard something in the closet myself. It was very clearly the sound of something alive in that closet that tapped into the door, or something behind the door. Bobby whispered, "See?" I turned around and picked up Bobby and said we're going to another room. I also grabbed Chris from the bathroom and brought him into Adam's room, where I locked the door. Adam and Lucy's room share a Jack and Jill bathroom with 2 entrances. I went into the bathroom and called Lucy and quietly asked if there was a possibility of there being an animal in the house or in the walls, because there were sounds that Bobby was hearing that I heard myself. She sounded concerned right away and wanted me to check the closet. I kept her on the phone as I went back to Bobby's room. My discovering the closet door to now be ajar confirmed that there was someone in the house with us. I told Lucy, and she freaked out, telling me it was most likely her crazy ex and to get the kids out of the house. I suddenly felt like my life were in danger, and her ex was going to come out of nowhere and run at me. I went to Adam's room and managed to get the 3 kids out of the room, but just as I did, I heard the front door to the house slam shut. I peeked down into the living room, and there was no one there, but the front door was shut. He must have made an exit while he could. I went to lock the door, then called 911. Lucy came home from work early, and was there when the police came. Without cameras or anything, there was no proof that it was her ex, though. Her ex is the father of Adam, but she keeps him away from her because of their past that I won't get into for her privacy. Long story short, he can't take it, and she just recently blocked his number, which would explain the possibility of him breaking into the house. The police recommended changing the locks on the doors and such to Lucy. She understood I wouldn't feel comfortable staying in that house for a while after that, so she started letting the kids stay with a relative or one of her parents coming to watch the kids. I don't know what happened after that because we kind of fell out of contacts. I didn't really like the fact that she was okay with me checking the closet when she was already suspicious that it was her ex. It was definitely a horrifying experience. I had just turned 14. It was the summer of 2012. I was looking for a job. My grandma had told me about a family that she was friends with, and they had 2 boys, Alexander and Danny. Alexander was 10 and Danny was 5. I was very excited to have a summer job and get some extra spending money. I went over to meet the family with my grandma, and they were friendly enough. The 2 boys seemed easy to handle and not babyish or whiny at all. In fact, the boys and I were playing with their trucks, getting along great. I set up a date with the parents, and they actually had a dinner to go to the next night. So the next night, it became time for me to head over to the house. It was a humid, rainy night. I walked into the house, and the parents were just getting ready to leave. They gave me a paper with rules and such, things they didn't want the kids to do and their routines. They wrote a little something on the side that said Danny swears he hears tapping on his window every night, but not to believe it, because they think it's just a silly story that kids make up. I was only 14 myself, so reading this was a little unnerving, but I sort of forgot about it. It was a chill night. We watched TV and played with toys. They didn't give me any sort of trouble, but when I told the boys it was time to get ready for bed, I noticed Danny starting to stall and get kind of distressed. I ignored it, thinking he's only 5 and probably wants to stay up later. Eventually, I got them both to settle down and go to sleep. About an hour and a half had passed. It was now 10 p.m. I heard Danny groggily but loudly yell for me. I rushed up to him and asked what was the matter. He told me he heard the tapping noise again. I instantly felt uneasy and nervous, but I just flicked on the light and looked out the window. Nothing outside except darkness and the solar lights from the neighbor's driveway. I calmly told Danny that it was probably just some bugs since it's summer after all. He seemed to come at ease when I said this and laid back down. As I walked out of the room to shut his door, I heard a faint tap noise against his window. I got the chills as I flicked on the light again and looked out the window. And again, nothing. I kept telling myself that it was just bugs flying into the window, but something deep down told me to do something. I told Danny not to worry as I opened the window and yelled out, "This is private property, I'm gonna call the police." Moments after I did so, I heard a frantic scurrying into the forest that was across the yard. By now, I must have had goosebumps all along my arms and legs, and I immediately called the police for real. I called the parents right after, and they were thankfully already on their way home. The police arrived and didn't seem at all surprised by what I had told them. They had gotten other reports in the area for quite some time about some stranger going up to people's windows at night, looking through them and tapping on them. They said they got calls telling them the same thing almost every week. Danny's parents just never believed him and I guess took it as some little kid's story or imagination, but it turned out to be very real. They searched the whole neighborhood and never found the person. After that night, I told the family in the nicest way possible that I didn't feel comfortable watching their kids anymore. And I still think to this day what would have happened if anything went differently. Like, God forbid the window was unlocked or open. Maybe sometimes parents shouldn't just brush whatever their young children say as just their imagination. This happened when I was 8 years old, and my little sister was 6. It's a memory that's kind of scarring, to the point that I just remember it so vividly, even as an adult, and it's something that stayed with me. Our parents hired a one-time babysitter for this weekend that they'd be away on a couples trip. It was some 16-year-old boy that responded to an ad that my mom posted in the public library. He happened to go to the high school that my parents went to, so I feel like they felt a safer connection with him. He was watching us for 3 nights from Thursday to Sunday. His name was Nathan. I don't know his last name. If I did, I'd say it. Most of the first night is a blur. I was only 8 after all. I remember not much other than playing Ratchet & Clank on my PlayStation in the basement all night because I was obsessed. Same thing the next day, on Friday. I was playing Ratchet & Clank for so long that I guess Nathan came down to build a rapport with me and asked to play with me. He told me he also liked the game, so we played multiplayer versus mode. From what I remember, I actually was having fun and started to like Nathan. The next day, I had my friend Zachary over and we played soccer in the backyard, which Nathan volunteered to ref for as he came outside with my little sister. Basically, he was a completely normal seeming dude for my 8-year-old mind. Zachary left not long after we all ate the pizza that Nathan ordered with the money I assume my parents left for food. That night before going to sleep, I was playing on my DS in bed, when Nathan came in and asked if I wanted to play more video games, and I'm sure I respectfully told him I'm tired. He would leave as expected, but that's not where this ends. I always was a heavy sleeper as a kid. Not anymore, but when I was 8, waking up in the middle of the night wasn't a regular occurrence. So waking up in my pitch black room was definitely a weird thing to happen that night. I remember flipping on my side after hearing my door closing. I looked across the room towards the door, and as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw someone standing in the corner of the room, and before I could digest what was happening and scream or react in any way, I heard Nathan go shh and whisper, "It's me." I didn't respond, but then he slowly got closer to my bed, pulled the covers off of me, and I swear he was about to get in the bed before I screamed stop or something along those lines, and he froze. I got out of bed and left the room. I went to my little sister's room, took a blanket from under her bed, and laid on the floor shaking, feeling extremely confused and uncomfortable. The whole next day, I didn't see Nathan. I knew he was in the house because he fed my little sister breakfast, but I knew he was avoiding me now. I couldn't exactly call my parents because I didn't know either of their cell phone numbers. It was a weird long day of me staying in my room and playing games with my little sister. Nathan never came in once. That night, I couldn't sleep for obvious reasons, and I don't know how much time passed before hearing my door creak open again. This time I didn't look up. I laid there until I heard the door close, and then a few moments of silence later, I looked up to the door, but he wasn't there this time. I turned on the lamp to confirm this, but even at 8, I knew he was creeping around again, and I wanted to go to sleep in my sister's room to protect her in my mind. I got up and took my pillows and blanket to my sister's room, and lo and behold, Nathan was already halfway towards my sister's bed in the pitch black room. I yelled at him to get away from her, and he told me to calm down, he's just checking on her. He hurried out of the room, and I locked the door. That was the last time I ever saw him. The next morning, I woke up on my sister's floor and told her let's play games in her room until Mom and Dad get back, which was early in the day, thank God. We heard our parents get home and talk with Nathan outside, but we didn't leave her room until he was gone. My parents asked me why I slept on her floor. I don't remember what I said, but I know I didn't tell them the real reason. In fact, I never did. I regret it often, not telling them all those years ago, so that Nathan guy would get in trouble. I'm scared because of me, he might have actually at some point successfully hurt a child. It's sadly something I kept bottled up my whole childhood, simply because I felt too embarrassed and awkward to tell anyone. about 15 years ago, maybe a little longer. I was in my early 20s, and I was living the I'm gonna be famous someday life. I was never a good student, and I was always the class clown. One thing that I always did well as a kid was make my friends laugh. Instead of going to college or getting a job right after high school, I decided I was going to become a stand-up comedian. Spoiler alert, I did not become a famous comedian, which maybe is the best joke of my stand-up career. Instead, I had nearly a decade of bombing on stage, and even worse than that, the most terrifying single-handed experience of my life happened to me. For a little bit of context, doing stand-up is hard and definitely not lucrative when you're not successful. Not to mention, stand-up comedy was not as popular as it is today. To say it is a grind is an understatement. You question your decisions every time you perform until you get that one crowd that laughs at one of your jokes. The high you experience from the crowd laughing and cheering is intoxicating, and I assume that's why comedians constantly keep grinding. Part of the grind is finding gigs that will pay you, or even just let you perform for a couple of minutes. I was fortunate enough to have several open mics in my hometown, but you're not getting paid at an open mic, and a lot of the time you're sharing the stage with all sorts of other talented people and not just comedians. Nothing kills a comedian's momentum like performing after someone who just poured out their soul with life-altering poetry. After a few years of performing at open mics, I decided to try to reach out to club promoters and local comedians who would get booked for actual shows. Most of the time, these shows would be several hours away if I were lucky. Usually, they were even further than that. I did a few shows, and this is where the grind gets real. It's also where my story takes a very terrifying turn. I didn't have very good luck with these traveling shows. I wasn't getting paid, and I was driving 4 or 5 hours across state lines just for 5 minutes of exposure. Not an ideal situation for someone who was broke and barely had any income coming in. One night, I had an amazing opportunity to perform at a show that was being held 5 hours from where I lived. This show was a competition for comedians trying to break into the mainstream. The first place prize was $1,000, but the real prize for me was that several moderately famous comedians were going to be the judges of the show. It was my chance to show actual comedians that I have talent. The worst part for me when I would make all these trips was that I had a garbage car and an old cell phone that was about as reliable as those big 1980s brick cell phones. I would always think to myself that if something happened, I would be stranded. My drives almost always consisted of nothing but farmland and open fields as far as you could see. Because I was a lazy person, I didn't bother to double check my printed out MapQuest directions. Instead, I decided to wing it, something I still regret to this day. I was lost. The directions I had did not match where I was. I had been on a backcountry road for some time, and I had no idea if I was even heading in the right direction. Thankfully, I always left for the traveling jobs early just in case I got lost. I may have been lazy, but I know myself well, and getting lost was not uncommon for me. It was still daylight when I started driving through a small town. Honestly, calling it a small town might be a stretch. There were a few beat-up old buildings and houses on a street that was maybe a couple of 100 feet in length. Outside of an old gas station, there were a few individuals who looked less than welcoming. I know that's kind of rude to say they were dirty and mean, but they were rude to me. They didn't look like they were using or anything like that. They just looked like they'd been beaten up by life. I asked where I was and tried asking them if I was on the right track. They were short with me, and after an awkward back and forth exchange, they finally told me where I needed to go. According to the rude townspeople, I was still somewhat on the right track. Somehow, I had missed a turn a while back, but if I stayed straight on this road for a while, eventually I would see the road I needed to be on. I thanked them and filled up my tank before I set off again. While I was pumping the gas, I noticed several of the people I had just talked to were staring at me. It was uncomfortable for sure. It was those dead-eyed stares, and it wasn't just one of them. I counted at least 4 of them just staring and standing completely still like a statue. It made me feel all sorts of weird. I finished up and got out of that small town as fast as I could. I started driving and rehearsing my routine to myself. I kept thinking about how ironically funny my conversation with the townspeople was, and I even tried thinking of ways that I could incorporate this experience into my stand-up routine. Not long after leaving the town, a beat-up white pickup truck flew by me going very fast. I didn't think anything of it at the time. When it was around dusk, I had been driving for nearly an hour since I left the town. There was nothing but trees on the left and right sides of the road. I had that gut feeling that I was probably lost. As I continued down the road, I heard a loud sound from underneath my car. and I started losing control of the vehicle. I knew right away what had happened. It was unmistakable. I had somehow gotten a flat tire. I pulled over to inspect the damage. I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't just a flat tire. Both of my front tires were completely obliterated. When I leaned over to take a closer look, I noticed that the tires were impaled with several nails. I pulled out my terrible cell phone, and of course, the service was not good. I tried calling a tow truck, but I had no idea where I was or even what road I was on. I hung up the phone. Instead of panicking, I was starting to get angry that I was going to miss the show. I was stupid, and my priorities were elsewhere. I decided to call one of my friends. I described everything that I remembered about the drive, and I told him about the small town with the gas station. He told me he was going to try to look up where I was and that he would call me back. I didn't know if I should just stay put in the car or I should try walking back in the direction of the town. I decided to stay put in the car because now that it was almost completely dark, it was starting to get cold. It was clear now that I wasn't going to make the show. While I was waiting to hear back from my friend, I noticed two bright headlights popping out from the horizon behind me. The headlights stopped moving a good distance from my car and didn't continue in my direction. The car was close enough that the lights were bright and annoying, but far enough away that I could not tell what kind of car it was. I don't know if it was a cop or some local trying to call the police to report a vehicle on the side of the road. If you're wondering why I didn't just call the police, it's because I was driving a car that was not inspected or properly insured at the time, and I wasn't trying to get that ticket in another state. Several minutes went by, and the car never moved. It just stayed parked a good distance behind me, shining those bright lights. After probably a good 5 minutes or so, the bright lights started to get a little closer. The vehicle was slowly moving towards the back of my car. As that was happening, two more lights could be seen in front of me, making their way toward me quickly. The loud vehicle stopped inches from my car. Eventually, the car that was behind me was parked directly behind my car, and I still couldn't tell who it was. While I was trying to adjust my eyes to the bright light in my rearview mirror, I noticed that the car doors from the vehicle in front of me were now open. That's when I noticed it was a white pickup truck, the same beat-up white pickup truck from earlier. Before I could notice anyone coming, I heard a loud bang on the driver's window, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the rude man from the gas station. I started to panic because the man was trying to open my car door. Even though it was locked, he was aggressively pulling on the door. He started to beat on the car window. I wasn't sure how long my window would last before it broke. As this was going on, I noticed one of the other men from the car make his way to the passenger side of my car. He also started to aggressively try to open the door. I was trying to yell at them to stop, but it was like they didn't understand what I was saying. They were just grunting and smashing the car doors. The guy at the driver's side door stopped trying to break in for a moment and instead just stood there, staring directly at me. It was just like those vacant stares from the gas station earlier. I can't even begin to explain how horrible that moment was. With no notice at all, he just started screaming. And it wasn't just a normal scream. He was howling and screaming at the top of his lungs. I don't know what came over me at that moment, but I decided that the best course of action was for me to just try and get out of the car and run. I pushed open the door as hard as I could, and thankfully, it was enough force to knock the man over. I ran as fast as I could into the woods, but instead of running blindly into the pitch-black forest, I decided to dive to the ground only several feet into the woods. I hoped that these guys would think I ran deeper into the woods, and thankfully, that's exactly what happened. Moments later, I heard footsteps of several people running by me. When I was sure I heard all of them run by, I quietly got up and ran back to my car. Surprisingly, my backpack and cell phone were still in the car. I grabbed them, stayed low, and just ran as fast as I could down the road. The entire time I was running, I expected them to jump out of the woods, but I never saw them again. About half an hour later, I was able to flag down a passing car. The woman was uncharacteristically kind. I don't know if I would have been so nice and trusting of a screaming man in the middle of nowhere. She called the authorities and even let me sit in her car until the police showed up. I told the cops everything, but as you might expect, there really wasn't anything they could do. There was no evidence of anything malicious other than some small dents in the car door, and given the condition of my car, the cops didn't really believe the dents were caused by them. I also received a couple of tickets for my car, which is just the icing on the cake for this story. I never found out why those people targeted me or what they wanted with me. Clearly, they were not trying to help. All things considered, I'm lucky that I'm here telling the story. All I can say is just be careful out there. You never know what people are capable of, especially when no one's around to witness. feel like I'm still not right from what happened to my two friends and I last summer. What was supposed to be an awesome girls' road trip turned into a nightmare that I'm not sure I'll ever fully get over. For a little bit of context, I'm not a spontaneous person. I'm one of those people who has to have everything planned very far in advance, and even then, every little detail needs to be accounted for. It's annoying for some, but it's just how I operate. In late June, I broke up with my boyfriend, who I had been dating for 5 years at that point. It was a messy breakup. One of the things that got me through the breakup was that my friend Sarah had just dumped her boyfriend as well. Having someone to spend time with who was also going through the same situation was such a blessing. Strangely, our bonding through misery and grief helped us both to move on. A few weeks after the breakup, our friend Alyssa invited Sarah and I on this cross-country trip she was going to be taking. Ordinarily, I would never do something like that. The anxiety alone would be enough for me to melt away. But for some reason, this time it sounded like a fun girls' trip. All three of us are fortunate enough to have jobs where we can take time off for a trip like this. Alyssa basically lives on the road. She's always traveling and finding these insane places all over the country. She's the type of woman who will just throw a sleeping bag down in the dirt and sleep under the stars. She's always been such a free spirit and lives for adventure. Sarah and I were much more sheltered. We decided to let Alyssa basically be the captain of our little crew for the trip. She planned it all out, and we were all going to be there for the ride. The first day or so was a little rough for me. I just wasn't used to winging it. But after that, I started really enjoying myself. On the second or third day, we drove by this insane-looking barn. It was definitely abandoned. There was no sign of human life anywhere. The farm looked like it had been completely overgrown by nature. Alyssa was begging us to go inside, but I wasn't feeling it. Alyssa was adamant that clearly nobody lived there. She was obviously correct, but I just couldn't bring myself to trespass. It's also worth noting that I'm just a huge baby. Not wanting to trespass was my excuse, but I was actually scared of someone squatting inside the barn. I had listened to one too many true crime podcasts, and I wasn't about to get kidnapped by some insane backwoods farm man. After a few minutes of arguing, Alyssa gave up, and we decided to keep moving on with our trip. The next week of traveling was amazing. We went sightseeing all over the US countryside. Alyssa showed us places and things that were truly incredible. We partied in bars in small towns, slept on a mountain, and met awesome people from all different walks of life. It really was incredible. The only thing that was a little annoying was that throughout the entire trip, Alyssa kept bringing up that barn. It seemed like any time she could work it into the conversation, she did. While we were driving back to civilization, Alyssa basically begged us to get a closer look at the barn. I don't know if it was the trip that made me come out of my shell a little bit, or just days of Alyssa breaking us down, but I was starting to warm up to the idea. I told her that if it looks like nobody had been there in years, then we could check it out. I was confident that most likely nobody had been there, but I just wanted to make sure I put that out in the universe. I wasn't even 100% sure that Alyssa could get us back there, but that girl is amazing sometimes. She knew exactly how to get there. We spotted the barn around 4:30 p.m. We drove the SUV on the dirt and grass and parked it several yards away from the barn. We didn't want to park right on top of the place just in case some scary farm man was living inside. Alyssa was like a kid on Christmas. She ran to the barn door first. It was crazy in that place. I'm pretty sure the vines were holding the building up. It almost sounded like the place was breathing, but I'm pretty sure that was just the integrity of the building slowly falling apart. The weirdest part was all this strange equipment that was still inside the barn. It didn't look like any farm equipment I've ever seen before, but I'm not a farmer, so maybe it was just older stuff. It looked like stuff you would find in a medieval dungeon. After we explored and took a bunch of pictures inside the barn, Alyssa wanted us to check out the farmhouse that was connected. At this point, I was fully invested, so she didn't have any pushback from me. We had to kick down the door because it was somehow warped into the frame and it wasn't opening. Inside, it was both creepy and sad. It was definitely empty and abandoned. It's not like the previous owner had furniture and stuff like that inside. It was empty, other than a small green table and a green wooden chair. What was sad was that I couldn't stop thinking about the people who had most likely lived there before. I mean, it was a farm at one point. Somebody had to have lived there before, and now it's just forgotten by history. We explored the house, and I imagined it could have been a cute little house at one point. After a while of just hanging out and talking inside the small house, Alyssa and Sarah both made a crazy suggestion. They suggested that we stay inside the farmhouse that night. Obviously, this seems like it would be a horrible idea, but at that moment, it seemed wild and exciting, and at this point of the trip, I was here for it. We'd been hanging out there so long already that I didn't realize it was almost 7 p.m. We went back to the car and grabbed our stuff. We ate some subs from the cooler, then drank a few beers and talked about the trip some more. Around 9, we started setting up our sleeping bags. We all set our alarms for 6 a.m. so we could get right on the road in the morning. We were all exhausted at this point, so it didn't take us long to pass out. I'm a light sleeper, so I was tossing and turning for a while and going in and out of consciousness. I must have finally fallen asleep briefly, because around 3 a.m., something strange woke me up. I swear, I thought I heard someone make a shush sound. I rose from the sleeping bag and scanned the room the best I could with only the moonlight faintly shining through the vines on the window. I didn't see or hear anything. My best guess was that either Alyssa or Sarah had just been snoring or something. I laid back down and shut my eyes. Almost instantly, I jumped up because there was a loud bang at the door. It was like someone crashed into the door. And remember, we had to break down the door, so it was basically just propped up against the door frame. If this really was a person, they could easily just push down the door. The bang on the door was loud enough that it woke up Alyssa and Sarah. Both were just as startled as I was. We all sat there frozen, basically holding our breaths, listening for another sound. Instead of a loud bang, we started to hear these soft and delicate taps coming from the window, which was on the other side of the room. Then the banging on the door started again. This wasn't the wind or the creaky barn. This was for sure people. People who clearly knew we were inside. We all huddled up together and panicked. It's easy to say what you would do in this situation, but I promise you, you would probably be paralyzed as well. The banging on the door stopped, and then the door was pushed open. 2 skinny men and 1 skinny woman walked inside. I would say all of them were maybe late 30s. They didn't rush in or do anything insane. Instead, they just slowly walked in and stood in front of us. Somehow, just walking in normally like that was scarier. Sarah started to scream, and in response to Sarah's screaming, one of the men started screaming. It was like he was mirroring her scream. The woman of the group started to shush Sarah. The man in the middle of the group started to gesture with his hands, almost like a mime. I didn't even realize until that moment that all 3 of them were holding a weird mask that they put on after the man was done gesturing. The masks were so weird. I know that's vague, but I've never quite seen masks like this before. The guy in the middle put on a mask that was just a giant purple cube. That's it. No face or anything. Just a purple cube. The other man, the one who was screaming, put on a mask that kind of looked like a homemade Batman mask that was made of cardboard. Then the woman put on what looked like a medical mask with plastic icicles you would hang up on the holidays hanging on each side of the mask, almost like tusks. They slowly started creeping closer to us, and the more we panicked, the louder and more irritated they became. As we screamed, they started to scream as well. The woman grabbed my shoulders, and because she was so skinny, I was able to push her down. The distraction caused the 2 men to look at the woman. The guy with the purple cube mask shouted that I was going to pay for that. Sarah had a small can of pepper spray on her keychain and started spraying in the direction of the masked people. It gave us enough of a window to run by them. The woman grabbed my ankle as we ran, but I was able to free myself quickly. As I was running away, I looked back and saw the woman reaching behind her in her waistband. I ran to the car as fast as I could. I did not want to wait and find out what she was reaching for. We could still hear them screaming from inside the farmhouse. They didn't chase us for some reason. I remember my vision being a little messed up as well from the spray that must have just been in the air as we ran out of the house. We drove away as fast as we could and made it back home in record time. We didn't actually report this to the police because we figured we're the ones that technically trespassed. Maybe those were the owners, even though I seriously doubt that. One of the scariest parts of this whole ordeal, for me at least, is that we have no idea where those people came from. They just suddenly appeared in the middle of the night. We explored that entire barn that afternoon, and there was no sign of life. No food, no footsteps, no footprints in the dust, no car, nothing. These deranged, mask-wearing lunatics just showed up out of nowhere with the sole purpose of harming us in some way. I'm still not over the mental scars from that trip. I'm happy I got that girls' trip out of my system, but I'm good if I never go on another cross-country trip again. I'll settle for a nice staycation next time. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to take a road trip across the US. This trip was supposed to be important and special because it was when I planned to propose to my now wife. Unfortunately, that's not the only reason the trip is memorable. One of the happiest memories of my life is also plagued by something that nearly ended both of our lives. This is the first time I'm trying to write this story instead of just telling it verbally, and probably the first time I've written anything since high school. I apologize if it's not the greatest literary work of art you've ever heard. For a little bit of backstory, I have a truck with a large cargo bed. It was more than big enough for her and I to lie down on the air mattress in the bed of the truck. We spent days hiking across the country and sleeping in designated areas in the back of my truck. I had camped a few times as a kid with my family, and I always hated setting up tents and sleeping on the ground. Sleeping in the comfort of my truck felt like a hybrid version of camping, and I was here for it. We both love the outdoors, but we'd be the first to admit that we're not the most nature-savvy people. Every night on the trip was beautiful. We were lucky when it came to the weather. Every night, we would fall asleep staring at the sky, and let me just tell you, if you've never gazed at the stars in the wilderness, you need to change that right now. One of the few downfalls of the trip is that my girlfriend was the lightest of light sleepers. Every sound woke her up. We were out in nature, so that means every gust of wind, every bird sound, every tree rustling caused her to wake up. I would always offer her something to help her sleep, but she would always deny it. She said it would make her wake up groggy. Apparently more groggy than being half asleep all night. But it wasn't being a light sleeper that kept her awake on this trip. She has a crippling fear of bears. Ever since one of her coworkers told her that her family was attacked by bears on a camping trip, my girlfriend has been on high alert. Every noise she heard on the trip, she assumed was a bear. Now with the backstory out of the way, I'll share what was almost the last night on Earth for my girlfriend and I. About 3/4 of the way through the trip, I proposed, and she said yes. It was one of the happiest days of my life. With the stress of proposing out of the way, I slept like a baby that night. That next morning, she was the most tired she'd been on the entire trip. When I asked her if she was scared of the noises, she kind of paused and didn't answer right away, which is weird behavior for her. She then went on to tell me that she woke up in the middle of the night because she swore she could hear someone walking on the outside of the truck. She stayed lying down, so she didn't see anyone, but she was convinced someone was walking just outside the truck bed. Every time she tried to sleep, she could hear the sounds of walking, and she was sure she even heard mumbling or talking at some point. I did believe her. Well, I believe that's what she thought she heard. I wasn't dismissive, but I was pretty sure we weren't being stalked or whatever she thought. Before we left in the morning, she gasped outside the truck. When I ran over, she pointed out what looked like a small footprint in the dirt next to the truck. I was probably being ignorant, but I thought it was a stretch to call it a footprint. I asked if it could have possibly been her footprint, and she instantly protested. I didn't argue with her because I could tell she was still freaked out. I made sure I checked my truck before we left and confirmed we didn't have a secret passenger. I did find in the backseat of my truck that my planner was on the seat, and it was open to the page where I had a list of places we were going to stop each night. But I didn't think anything about it. I figured she was looking at it beforehand, or it's possible that I could have left it there. I put it back in my bag, got ourselves ready, and we hit the road. It took a little while for her to get out of her morning fog, but after a large coffee, she was feeling like herself again and didn't bring up the previous night again. We spent the next day just being obnoxiously in love as we hiked through the mountains. Night was approaching, so we set up our little camp nook in the truck bed. I could tell she was a little more uneasy tonight than she had been any other night. It wasn't the bears that were freaking her out. It was the possibility of another person outside the truck. I told her we could sleep inside the locked truck, or even find a hotel if she wanted to, but she insisted that we stay in the truck bed since it was our last night in the wilderness. I decided to stay awake on this night and make sure she fell asleep. It took her a while, but she finally passed out around midnight. I even dug out my old portable DVD player from high school and threw on an old season of Family Guy I had, just to get her mind off the silence of the night. The once beautiful silence was now something she was afraid of, even though she would never admit that. I shut the DVD off and rolled over, trying to get some sleep. Before I even dozed off, I thought I heard something outside my truck.
My first thought was a baby bear because it sounded bigger than a raccoon or coyote. I thought it was imperative not to wake her up and cause alarm. Slowly and quietly, I crawled to the wall of the truck bed and peered over the edge. I couldn't believe my eyes. Someone was walking around the front of the truck, a smaller figure with a hood on, and they were mumbling something to themselves. I quickly fell back into the truck bed, since they didn't see me because they were walking in the opposite direction. I didn't know if I should wake her up or not. I thought that would make too much noise, and right now, my main goal was to make as little noise as possible. I thought about trying to tackle the walking person, since they looked a lot smaller than me, but I didn't know if they had a weapon or if someone else was hiding nearby to jump me as soon as I made a move. Keeping my fiancée safe was #1 priority. I was listening intently as the figure walked outside, and I was able to tell that they were walking outside the truck and they made their way around the truck and walked by the foot of the truck bed. I tried to angle my head to get a look at the person. I couldn't see the face, but I could tell it was a woman. I could see the blonde hair coming out from the bottom of the hood, and I could clearly hear mumbling at this point, and the voice was unmistakably of a woman. I planned to jump out and confront the woman the next time she passed in front of the truck bed. I was somewhat relieved that my fiancée was asleep for all this. I waited several seconds, but she never made her way back to the truck bed. I leaned over the edge of the truck again, and I didn't see her on my side of the truck or the front of the truck. That means she either fled into the woods or was on the other side of the truck that I couldn't see. As fast as I could, I took out my cell phone and typed into my notes, "Don't make a sound. Someone is outside the truck. I'll distract them, take the keys, start the truck, and I'll jump back into the bed." I quietly woke up my fiancée and made sure the first thing she saw was me holding my finger to my mouth, telling her not to make a sound as I held up the phone for her to read. As quietly as I could, I handed her the key. I could tell she was confused and terrified, but thankfully, she didn't make a noise. I grabbed my pocket knife and I jumped outside the truck, trying to scare the intruder away, but nobody was outside the truck. I lowered my guard for a second, and I heard my fiancée yell to me if everything was okay. Just as I was about to answer, I felt intense pain in my ankle. The woman was hiding under the truck, and while I was standing there, she smashed my ankle with a thick tree branch. I stumbled to the ground, and while I was picking myself up, she crawled from underneath the truck, screaming erratically, and she threw the thick branch at me. I put my arms up in defense, and she pulled out what I think was a kitchen knife of some kind, and she started to swing it around crazily. I continued backing away from her insane movements, and once I felt like we were far enough away from the truck, I shouted to my fiancée to start the truck now. She jumped from the side of the truck bed and got to the door. The woman immediately diverted her attention and started running for my fiancé. We were far enough away that she was able to start the truck and she drove off, leaving a massive cloud of dust. The woman started to scream, and it almost sounded like she was crying. She drove a few feet before turning around and driving straight in the direction of this insane woman. The woman dove out of the way. That's when I finally saw her face. It was my ex-girlfriend. She had some problems when we were younger, but the last I knew, she was doing well. I couldn't believe it. Our breakup was not good. I even had to get the law involved at one point because she would just stalk around the outside of my house in the middle of the night and then claim her only crime was that she was still in love with me. This was also 6 years ago at that point. It's not like this was a fresh wound. Once her hood was off, she fell to her knees and I could see her crying. The usual version of myself would have gone over to make sure she was okay, but not anymore. This woman was clearly not well, and I was not going to take any chances. My fiancée drove by me, and I had more than enough time to open the passenger side door and get in. My ex didn't even try to chase us. We just kept driving. As soon as I was able to get service, I called the police and reported everything. Most surprising was that she eventually just went home a few days later and the police confronted her. To her credit, she didn't deny anything. She even told the police that she wanted to be taken in because she's not well. She claimed that she wanted to kill my fiancé. When they asked if she wanted to harm me, she apparently just cried. The last update I received about her was that she was in some type of institution, but I'm not sure how long that was supposed to be. It's been a few years, and nothing of note has happened since. I rarely think about that night, but whenever I hear stories like this, I'm reminded of that horrible experience, and it makes me wonder if I'll ever see her again. My wife looks her up on Facebook and other social media platforms all the time, but as of the time of writing this, she's still MIA, and I hope she remains that way to me for the rest of my life.
I was 26 when this happened, and it was my first time ever going to Coachella. My friend Alyssa and I had talked about going for years, but either money got in the way or one of us couldn't get time off work. That year, everything finally lined up, so we actually committed to it. We flew out to California, rented a little 2-bedroom Airbnb, and made a whole trip out of it. We were both really excited because neither of us had ever been to a festival that big before. We had both been to smaller concerts and local stuff, but nothing on that level. The whole first day honestly felt like stepping into another world. Everywhere you looked, there were huge crowds, weird outfits, music coming from different directions, and people acting like they had no responsibilities at all. Best way to put it, it was a fairy tale world. It was kind of overwhelming at first, but in a good way. We had a really good first 2 days, nothing bad happened. We saw a bunch of artists we liked, took pictures everywhere, ate overpriced food, and stayed out late. We were tired by the end of each night, but it was worth it. By the third day, we were exhausted, but it was that kind of exhausted where you know you just have to push through because it's the last day and you don't want to waste it. Before the trip, Alyssa had brought up the idea of bringing Molly. I had only done it one other time years before, and it had been fine, so I agreed. We kept saying we'd save it for the last day, and that's exactly what we did. Looking back, I wish more than anything I never touched it. We took it in the late afternoon before one of the sets we were really excited for. At first, I didn't feel much. We were walking around trying to get closer to one of the stages, and I remember saying to Alyssa that I thought maybe it was weak or old because it wasn't hitting me. She said the same thing because she wasn't feeling much either. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then, out of nowhere, it started kicking in hard. At first, I actually liked it. I felt lighter, more social, and everything around me seemed brighter and more exciting. The music sounded amazing. I remember thinking that I understood why people did it at festivals. But after maybe an hour, something started bothering me. I kept noticing the same person. At first, I thought I was imagining it. There were thousands of people there, so of course you're going to accidentally notice the same outfit or the same face more than once. But this wasn't like that. It was the same actual guy. The first time I really noticed him, he was maybe 20 feet away in the crowd. He looked older than most people around us, maybe around 35. He had dark hair, kind of scruffy facial hair, and was wearing a black shirt and boots, which already made him stand out because most people there were dressed way lighter and more colorful. He wasn't doing anything crazy, he was just standing there looking in our direction. I didn't let it bother me at first. Then later I saw him again near one of the drink stands, then again when we were moving between stages, then again when Alyssa and I were standing off to the side near a fence trying to decide where to go next. After the 4th or 5th time, I told Alyssa I kept seeing the same guy everywhere. She laughed and right away said it was probably just the Molly and that I was focusing too hard on random people. I remember laughing a little too because I didn't want to sound too paranoid, but it was getting hard to brush off. It wasn't like I was just noticing him in the distance once in a while. It felt like every time I turned around he was there. Not right next to me, but always somewhere in view. Hours went by like that. I was trying to still enjoy myself, but the high had started feeling off. It stopped being that warm, fun feeling and started turning into this restless, overstimulated feeling. My jaw tensed up, my heart felt too fast, and I couldn't seem to relax. I told myself I was probably dehydrated or tired. We had been doing a lot all weekend, barely sleeping, walking around in the heat, drinking, everything. At one point when we were packed into the crowd waiting for another set, that guy finally came right up to me. It happened so suddenly that I froze for a second. He came up on my side smiling and started trying to dance near me like he was just some random friendly festival guy. Then he leaned in and started saying stuff to me that I could barely hear over the music, but it was obvious he was flirting. I remember him saying I looked really good and asking if I was there with anyone. I told him I was there with my friend and tried to be polite about it because I didn't want to set him off or make a scene. I kind of smiled and shook my head and said I was good. He kept hovering though. It wasn't aggressive yet, but it was pushy enough to make me uncomfortable. I turned to pull Alyssa closer to me so we could just move away.
and that was when I realized she wasn't there anymore. I started turning in circles looking for her, thinking maybe she just moved a few feet away, but I couldn't see her anywhere. That made me panic way faster than it normally would because of how off I already felt. The guy noticed right away that I was looking around and asked if I lost my friend. I said yes. Then he said he could help me look for her. There was something about the way he said it that made me instantly not trust him at all. It was too eager. I just told him no thanks and started pushing my way out of the crowd. He didn't grab me or anything, but I could feel him watching me leave. I finally got away from that stage and found a patch of grass farther back where it was quieter and less packed. I sat down because I felt like my body was shutting down on me. My vision started getting weird in a way I'd never felt before. The best way I can describe it is that everything looked squiggly. Not blurry exactly, but like nothing would stay still. The lights, the people, even the ground all had this shaky look to them. It scared me because I knew then that I had taken too much or had some kind of bad reaction. I started calling Alyssa over and over. The calls kept failing or not going through because the service there was terrible. I probably called her 10 times before one finally connected. When she picked up, I could barely hear her, but I just kept telling her where I was and that I needed her to come get me because something was wrong. It felt like forever before she found me, but it was probably only around 15 minutes. She could tell right away I was not okay. I told her I needed to leave, and she didn't argue with me. We ended up leaving the festival way earlier than we planned because I was having such a bad high. The walk out felt endless. Every noise felt too loud, and every person brushing past me made me jump. I kept looking around, half expecting to see that same guy again, but I didn't. Back at the Airbnb, both of us were completely drained. We had one more night there, and then we were flying home the next evening. Alyssa started talking about packing some of her stuff up that night so she wouldn't have to do it in the morning, but I told her I'd do mine tomorrow. I just wanted to lay down. My body was exhausted in a way that overpowered everything else. Even though I was still high, I felt so physically dead that I just crawled into bed, shut the light off, and laid there in the dark. I didn't feel normal, but I felt too tired to care. I must have drifted off into this half-sleep state because I wasn't fully out, but I definitely lost track of time. Then at some point, I opened my eyes. I have no idea what woke me up. Maybe a sound, maybe just my body being on edge. But the second I looked toward the bedroom doorway, I saw a figure standing there. It was tall and completely still, just inside the doorway, facing me. At first, my brain couldn't even process what I was looking at. I thought maybe Alyssa was standing there for some reason, but it was too tall and broad. Then I focused on the face. Even in the dark, I could tell. It was the man from the festival. I know how insane that sounds, especially with the state I was in, but that's exactly what I saw. He stood there looking at me from a few feet away from my bed. I remember this horrible, cold feeling going through my whole body. Then I started screaming. Not just yelling, full-on screaming as loud as I could while throwing the covers over my head like that was going to do something. I kept screaming until Alyssa came into my room. The second she turned on the light, there was nobody there. The doorway was empty. The room was empty. Alyssa kept asking me what happened, and I was crying so hard I could barely get the words out. I told her I saw the guy from the festival standing in my doorway. She looked freaked out by how serious I was, but she kept telling me that it had to be the drugs and that I was still having a bad high. I honestly wanted to believe her, because the other option was way worse. But what bothered me was how real it looked. It didn't feel dreamlike at all. It felt like waking up and seeing an actual person in the room. I begged Alyssa to sleep in the bed with me that night, and she did. Neither of us wanted to go back to sleep after that, so we laid there talking quietly for a while with the lights on in the hallway. She kept trying to calm me down and make normal conversation. Eventually, somehow, we both drifted off. The next morning, I woke up to Alyssa screaming my name and shaking me. For a second, I thought maybe I was still dreaming. Then I sat up and saw her standing near my bedroom doorway, staring at the floor. I looked down and saw muddy boot prints on the hardwood. I still get chills thinking about it. They started near the front part of the house and came down the hall. Then they stopped right at the doorway, exactly where I had seen that figure standing. After that, the prints turned around and went back down the hall toward the front door. I remember just staring at them, feeling this rush of sickness go through me. It was like my whole body dropped.
That was the moment I realized what I saw was not some Molly hallucination. Somebody had really been inside that house while we were sleeping, or while I was half asleep. And unless there was some impossible coincidence, it was him. Alyssa looked just as scared as I felt. We started checking everything right away. We made sure the front door was locked now, checked the windows, checked both bedrooms, the bathroom, every room. Nothing obvious was missing, which somehow made it creepier to me. It meant whoever came in wasn't just trying to steal something. We packed faster than I thought possible. Neither of us showered, ate, or even really talked much. We just threw everything into our suitcases and got out of there. Once we were out, we contacted the Airbnb host and told them someone had broken in during the night. I remember sending pictures of the prints because I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. The host sounded shocked and apologetic, but by then I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. We spent the rest of that day basically on edge until it was finally time to go to the airport. We made it home safely and nothing else happened, but that whole trip has stayed with me ever since. What bothers me most is not knowing exactly how he found us, assuming it really was him. Maybe he followed us when we left. Maybe he saw us call a ride. Maybe he watched from farther away than I realized. I don't know. I just know I saw that man at the festival over and over, then I saw him in the doorway, and the boot prints proved someone had actually been there. Ever since that happened, I have never touched Molly again or any drug like it. People joke about bad trips, but that experience permanently changed how I think. Even now, I guess due to PTSD, I still glance at the bedroom doorway first before anything else. Over the summer, my girlfriend from college, Valentina, invited me to come visit her family. Her family lives in San Diego, California. My parents basically forced me to go because I wasn't doing anything else that summer besides working and sleeping. It was a Friday afternoon, and I had just gotten off my plane. The flight felt like forever since I was flying across the country. I got a text from Valentina telling me to come outside so she could pick me up. She and her dad came to pick me up in an old Toyota. I don't remember much from the car ride to her beach house, though. We pulled up to a beautiful villa on the beach. Valentina's dad helped me get my suitcase out and escorted me to my room. My room was on the lower level, separated from everyone else upstairs. For a guest room, however, it had a great view of the beach. I could also see the side stairs that led to the front door on the second floor. I unpacked my clothes and toiletries, trying to get settled into my room. Then I heard knocking on my door. It was Valentina. She wanted me to meet her siblings, but I'm not going to talk about them much as they're irrelevant to the story. However, she introduced me to her mom. Her mom was a nice older woman. She made me feel welcomed. Valentina ended the conversation when she said she was taking me to the beach. She went upstairs to change. I went to my room to do the same. We got on the beach and the sun was setting. She told me it's a great time to take some pictures for my Instagram. Being the nice and helpful person I am, I agreed I would take her pictures. The beach was crowded, so I knew this would be difficult. I probably took 100 pictures before she was finally satisfied. I looked back at the pictures, and something was off about them. I noticed a man in the background of every picture, sometimes staring at Valentina from behind or staring at me. I looked at the general direction he was standing in the most recent picture, but he was gone. I muttered to myself, what the f***? I tried telling Valentina, but she just shrugged it off. I started to feel very paranoid. I always had the fear of someone stalking me. I knew I had to be a man and hide this fear. Later, Valentina and I went back out to the beach. It was around midnight, and one of her best friends was having a bonfire. We walked down to the beach to the gathering. After being a social butterfly for a while, my boss called me. He was pretty chill, so I told him about my trip and when I would be back. As I was talking to him, I saw a black figure on the beach, just staring at me. I pretended not to see him and just turned the other direction. I guess my boss noticed my sudden pause because he asked, "Are you okay?" I responded quickly saying, "Yeah, I was just a little surprised by what I just saw." He didn't question it and immediately got back on topic. The party started to die down. People were finishing up their drinks and getting into their Ubers. I asked Valentina's best friend, who was sober, if she could drive us home. She agreed to take us home since we were a 2-minute drive away. In the car, Valentina asked me, why didn't we just walk back on the beach? I was debating whether I should tell her the truth or if I should just make something up. I told her, "You're absolutely plastered right now. There's no way you're walking." She rolled her eyes. We got home and I helped her upstairs because I needed her to be quiet. I slept in her room that night because I didn't feel safe being alone downstairs near the beach. The next day came. I woke up with a feeling of having to throw up. I stayed in bed all day. I told Valentina and her parents that I just needed rest for a day. Then I would be able to function for the rest of the week. I woke up around 7 p.m. to Valentina knocking on my door. She told me they're going to downtown San Diego for dinner, but would be back before midnight. I nodded my head in agreement, then went back to sleep. I started to have a dream of someone tapping on a glass table rapidly. It was getting so annoying that I woke up. The tapping stopped. I turned on my side to face the exterior stairs, and that was when I saw it. I saw the guy from the pictures at the beach at my window, waving at me. He had a black hood on. He went running up the stairs, where I heard the front door open. I nearly screamed. Wasn't the front door locked? How was he in the house? I went to my door and put my weight on it. He wasn't getting in. I heard nothing. No one going down the stairs or anything. Then I heard someone on the other side of the door jerking the door handle. He was trying to put his weight into the door, but nothing was coming through that door. I heard him back away from the door. That's when I grabbed my phone and called 911. It took 5 minutes before I heard the police opening the front door. I decided it was safe to leave my room, and I booked it upstairs. But of course, the creep had left long before the cops showed up. Shortly behind the cops, Valentina's family showed up worried. They asked me if I was okay, but that wasn't what was important. I needed to make sure he didn't take or do anything. I heard a scream from Valentina as she went to her room. I followed her in. She pointed to a camera in the corner of the room. The police took it for investigation. The creep also took Valentina's clothes and bathing suits. I stayed for the rest of the week, but I'm still scared from that experience 2 months later. I don't know how that guy found us or what his intentions were. I didn't know if he wanted me or Valentina, but most frightening, what would he have done if he did get into my room? My girlfriend and I took a trip to Palm Springs last year because we both needed a break from work and just wanted somewhere quiet where we could sit by a pool and relax. We found a modern-looking Airbnb that was about 15 minutes outside the main part of the city, kind of on the edge where the houses start getting more spaced apart and the desert starts taking over. It was a 1-story house with big glass doors facing the backyard and a decent-sized pool. The listing said it was very private and good for couples. That was exactly what we wanted. We booked it for 4 nights. When we arrived, the place looked exactly like the photos. It was clean, modern, had white walls, concrete floors, basic furniture. The backyard had a pool, some lounge chairs, and one of those small storage sheds off to the side that I assumed was just for pool equipment. There was desert all around the back fence, and you couldn't really see any neighbors from the yard. The host never met us in person. We just got a door code. Everything felt normal the first day. We went out to dinner, came back, watched TV, and went to sleep. The first weird thing happened the first night, but it was small. Around maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, I woke up because I thought I heard something outside. It sounded like maybe a light thump or something hitting the side of the house. I just assumed it was the house settling or maybe wind. Desert areas get weird temperature changes at night, so I figured it was that. I went back to sleep. The second day, we mostly stayed by the pool. At one point, while we were laying on the chairs, I thought I heard what sounded like a voice somewhere far away. Not like someone talking normally, more like someone calling something out. I even asked my girlfriend if she heard it. She said she thought she heard something, but we both kind of laughed it off because there was basically nothing around us. There was no sidewalks, there was no foot traffic, it was just sand and scattered houses way off in the distance. We even joked it was probably just something dragging lightly against the outside wall near the bedroom. I got up and looked through the glass door, but didn't see anything. The backyard lights weren't on, and everything looked normal. I told her it was probably just branches or some animal.
There were lizards and stuff around, so we didn't think much of it. Night 2, we again heard a couple sounds, but nothing that made us think someone was actually there. Just random ticks and small impacts that you could easily explain away. Night 3 was when everything changed. We had gone to bed around midnight, and I was still awake scrolling on my phone when I noticed light coming through the sides of the blinds. At first, I thought maybe a car drove by, but then it stayed on. I got up and looked through the edge of the blinds and saw one of the motion lights on in the backyard. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, and then it shut off. About maybe 10 seconds later, another one turned on further down along the side of the house. That immediately made my stomach drop because it didn't feel random. It felt like something was triggering them in a path. My girlfriend asked what I was doing, and I told her I thought someone might be outside. She immediately sat up and got scared. We both watched as another light turned on near the back fence, then another closer to the pool. It really looked like someone walking around the outside of the house. She started telling me to close the blinds fully. She kept saying, "Shut them, shut them." I closed them completely, and we both just sat there quietly. I could tell she was genuinely scared. I was too, but I was trying not to show it, part of being a man in a relationship, I guess. She kept saying we should just ignore it and stay inside, but my brain kept going to the idea that someone could be trying to break in. I said I was going to go check outside just to make sure. She kept telling me not to. She actually grabbed my arm and told me that was a stupid idea. I told her I would just step out for a minute. I went into the kitchen and grabbed one of the bigger knives from the knife block. I didn't tell her this though, I didn't want to freak her out. I remember my hands actually shaking a little, which isn't normal for me. I opened the back sliding door slowly and stepped outside. It was dead quiet out there. I stood there for maybe a minute just listening. Then I walked slowly around the pool area, looking around the fence line and the corners of the house. I didn't see anyone. After maybe 5 minutes, I started thinking maybe I was just being paranoid and that maybe an animal had triggered the lights. Then I noticed footprints in the sand near the side of the house. They were very clear shoe prints, not animal tracks. This is when my heart started pounding. The prints went from the side of the yard toward the small shed that was next to the house. I followed them slowly, trying to be quiet. I remember thinking if someone was hiding, I didn't want to surprise them, but I also didn't want them surprising me. The footprints went straight to the shed door. When I got there, the doors were completely closed. The footprints just ended right in front of me. That was the moment I felt actual fear. Not just nervousness, real fear. I stood there maybe 3 or 4 feet from the door, just staring at it. I couldn't hear anything at first. I took another step closer and just listened. I was trying to hear breathing or movement. For maybe 5 seconds, there was nothing. Then, very clearly from inside, I heard a man's voice say in a normal, calm tone, "Excuse me, could you open the door, please?" I froze completely. I didn't say anything. Then right after that, the same voice did this quiet, creepy laugh. A small laugh, like he thought something was funny. I didn't wait another second. I turned and ran straight back to the house. I slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. My girlfriend was already standing there asking what happened, and I was honestly struggling to get the words out because I was so freaked out. I told her there was someone in the shed and that he asked me to open the door. She immediately became hysterical, asking if I was serious. I told her, yes, unfortunately I am, and I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was on the phone explaining everything, we saw the outside lights turn off again. Then about 15 seconds later, one of them turned back on. Then another, again like someone moving around the house. But now we couldn't see anything because the blinds were completely shut. That almost made it worse because we knew someone was out there, but couldn't see where. The dispatcher told us to stay inside and keep everything locked. It took about 20 minutes for police to get there because of how far out the house was. Those 20 minutes honestly felt like hours. Every little sound made us jump. When the police finally arrived, they knocked and announced themselves, and I've never felt more relieved to see the police, coming from someone who hates the cops. They checked the backyard first and then the shed. One of the officers told me to stay inside while they opened it. After a few minutes, they came back and said nobody was inside anymore. They asked me a bunch of questions about what exactly I heard and saw. I told them everything, including the voice and the footprints. They said it looked like someone may have been staying in there temporarily. They found some empty water bottles and food wrappers. One officer told us sometimes people hide in vacant properties or rental properties, especially in more isolated areas. He said the person probably left once they realized we had called the police. They recommended we not stay there that night, and probably not the rest of the trip either. Before we finished packing, one of the officers asked if either of us owned a dirty baseball hat he found pushed behind the couch. We both immediately said no. We went through the whole Airbnb multiple times, and we both knew for a fact that hat was not there before. The officer just kind of nodded and said it was possible the guy had gotten inside at some point, but we'd have no real way of knowing when. That honestly shook me almost more than the shed did, because it meant he might have been inside while we were there, maybe even while we slept. That was enough for us. We packed everything immediately. While we were packing, I tried messaging the Airbnb host multiple times explaining what happened and asking if they knew anything about someone accessing the shed. Every message showed as read, but he never responded. That honestly made it even creepier. No response, not even concern. We left and drove back toward the city and ended up staying at a cheap motel because it was the only thing available last minute. The next day, I contacted Airbnb support directly and explained everything and gave them the police report number. It took about a day of arguing, but they did refund us for the last unused night. We never heard from the host again. No apology or explanation or anything. We tried to still enjoy the rest of the trip and did some normal tourist stuff, but honestly, it kind of stuck with us the whole time. The worst part for me is just knowing someone had been right outside where we were sleeping for multiple nights, and we probably just kept dismissing the sounds as normal house noises. And I think about how calm that voice sounded when he asked me to open the door, like it was some joke to him, like he expected me to actually do it. And honestly, knowing now there was proof he had been inside the house at some point makes it even harder not to think about.
There's this lake that my brother and I used to fish. We'd use live bait, usually crickets or worms, and we'd catch a ton of bluegill. It was a fun time, and some of those early memories are the reason I've been such an avid fisherman for most of my life. The lake wasn't the most popular fishing spot, despite being pretty well stocked from what I can remember. I think most of the locals just found it inconvenient and inaccessible unless you were prepared to hike through the woods a bit, which my brother and I always were. The seclusion was actually one of my favorite things about it, almost like I was sharing a private activity that not everyone got to experience. Everyone knows the best lake fishing happens during periods of low light, meaning early morning or late evening. It's more customary to wake up at the crack of dawn and get out early, but my brother and I developed this habit of going out later in the day and staying into the night. It was our substitute for whatever most high school kids did at that time of night on the weekend, probably partying and whatnot. It was a Friday night, and everything was going according to plan. We reached the lake just as the sun started to set, and by the time we were all baited up, the sun was already starting to dip. We were positioned at the edge of the lake on this little formation of rocks that made a good comfortable surface for us and all our excess gear. It was something we had done hundreds of times. As we were fishing though, something caught my eye on the far side of the lake. There was movement in the water, and by the sheer rippling of it, I was surprised it had taken me so long to notice. I pointed it out to JJ, and the two of us strained our eyes in confusion, wondering what was causing it. Keep in mind, this lake was pretty sizable, and when coupled with the low visibility, it wasn't like you could see perfectly clearly across it. But then, as we were both looking at the ripples in the water, something happened that I would have never expected, not in a million years. A dark mass started rising out of the water where the ripples had been, and as it emerged, my assumption that it had been a huge fish was immediately dispelled. It was not a fish. It was way too big and way too upright. There was only one explanation, really. I think my brother and I realized it at the same time, because I heard him curse at the same time I did. It was a person. Think about how strange that is on its own. Not only was there a literal person in a somewhat private lake after sunset, but they had just been submerged below the surface. And not just that, They must have been down there for quite some time too, otherwise we would have noticed them earlier. It was freaky enough to quicken my heartbeat a little, and I got this compelling urge to leave. My brother didn't want to though, saying that we had just gotten out there, and that person in the lake was too far away to have any kind of effect on us. I figured he wasn't wrong, so the two of us spent the next few minutes watching the person in the lake, trying to rationalize the sight. They were swaying back and forth, rhythmically, almost hypnotically. Their movements weren't jerky or choppy, but perfectly fluid, like they were commanding the water around them as opposed to merely cutting through it. Our fishing poles were all but neglected at that point, lying there untouched while the two of us kept our attention fixated on the strange sight across the lake. Was it possible they were fishing? No, that seemed ridiculous. Fishing underwater? Unheard of. JJ suggested that maybe they were enjoying a night swim, which was plausible, until I grazed the surface of the lake with my hand and instantly recoiled at how cold it was. You'd have to be a psycho to enjoy swimming in temperatures that low. Without much else to do besides ignore them and keep fishing, I snapped out of my trance and encouraged my brother to do the same. But when I looked over at him, I realized that he was either much more invested or much more scared than I was, maybe both. Instead of heeding my advice, he sat there motionlessly with his lips slightly parted and his eyes glued to the lake. He wasn't even holding his fishing pole anymore. I said his name a few times in frustration before he finally averted his gaze, instinctively picking his fishing pole back up. With a little shake of his hand, he said sorry, and the two of us tried to resume fishing, although it was pretty clear that our attention was elsewhere. I'm not really sure what I expected to happen. I guess I figured that person would eventually get out of the lake, or notice us, or do something other than just stand there. After a few minutes of mindlessly casting and reeling, JJ tapped my shoulder and said, "Look." I looked back across the lake just in time to see that person submerge again, disappearing below the surface. I found myself staring at the spot they had just been, expecting them to reappear any second, but they didn't. A minute passed, and then another. It dawned on me that JJ had his phone out with the stopwatch running. As it ticked up past 2 minutes, I grew increasingly astonished at how long they were holding their breath. JJ theorized that maybe it was someone training, and I almost laughed at the thought of an Olympic diver testing their lung capacity out there, in a freezing cold lake in the middle of nowhere after the sun had set. Suddenly, the thought wasn't so funny anymore, and I started packing up, telling JJ we were leaving. But he held me back, saying he wanted to wait and see how long they could hold their breath for. I told him fine, but gathered up our stuff anyway, feeling that urge to leave start creeping back in. Just before the 3-minute mark, I noticed ripples in the water again, only this time they were much, much closer, 1/5 of the way out instead of all the way on the other side. The realization that this person had not only held their breath for nearly 3 minutes, but had done so while swimming was enough for me to raise my voice at JJ. This time he didn't argue, and the two of us stood up, preparing to leave. But we couldn't go just yet. The curiosity was far too strong. JJ and I watched as the person started emerging again, and this time we could see them clear as day. To my utter surprise, it was actually a woman, not a man like I had anticipated. She had long brown hair and was wearing what looked like a dark green swimsuit. And there was one more thing I need to mention. She was kind of beautiful. She didn't look much older than we were, maybe a year or two if I had to guess. The moment I saw her, I instantly felt less intimidated, less scared too. I started wondering if maybe my brother and I had been too hasty with our intention to leave. The two of us were still frozen in place though, and she was actually the one who broke the silence. She flashed an alluring smile and said, "Hi," almost like she was trying to be playful and coy, like she hadn't just held her breath for 3 minutes while swimming through a freezing cold lake. She was definitely a strong swimmer. It was obvious from the way she bobbed around, seeming just as comfortable in the water as most people would on land. I was dumbfounded, too perplexed to speak, but my brother blurted out the question I was dying to ask. He asked her what she was doing, and I had to remind myself that she was behaving like a crazy person, as harmless as she looked. She leaned her head back and said she was swimming. My brother said, "Well, yeah, obviously," then asked her if she was training for something. She gave us another teasing smile and said something like that, then glided a little closer to us. Then she actually asked us if we wanted to join her. Pure insanity. I spoke up for the first time, asking her if she was crazy and telling her the water was freezing. She laughed and called us bitches, then said we'd get used to the temperature fast. JJ said no, and she started glaring at us with a finger on her lip like she was thinking. I don't know if it was her cavalier attitude or the icy look in her eye, but the alarm bell started ringing, and I was terrified all over again. There were so many things I wanted to ask her. Who was she? Was she alone? How long had she been out there? Did she live nearby? But I didn't. Instead, I just grabbed JJ's shoulder and told the pretty lake girl we were leaving. I'm not sure what I was expecting her to do, but I definitely wasn't expecting her to start screaming. She screamed no at the top of her lungs, and I stumbled backwards out of pure shock. My brother and I made sure we weren't leaving any of our stuff behind and then started running away from the lake. She kept screaming after us, though. She was yelling for us to come back and get in the water. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, she just started shrieking at one point. Not words, just shrieking. It sounded like someone being stabbed. I could still hear her behind us by the time we were halfway back to the car. Part of me was expecting her to get out of the water and start chasing us, but I don't know if she ever did. By the time we made it back to the car, JJ already had the police on the line. He told them what had happened, and even though they asked us to stay nearby so they could question us, he told them he didn't feel comfortable doing that, then hung up. I probably would have done the same thing. That's how badly I wanted to get out of there. You might think the experience would have discouraged my brother and I from continuing to fish there, and it did, but only for a while. We actually did go back a fair amount, though for the first handful of outings we made sure to bring our dad with us. It took some convincing to get him to believe us, but he ultimately did. He was pretty curious and wanted to see this strange girl for himself, but we never saw her again. For all we knew, the police had found her and dealt with her however they decided to. It became somewhat of a shared joke between my brother and I. It actually got to a point where every time we fished that lake, a little part of us wanted to see her again. But now that more time's passed, and that lake is no longer part of my life, I've begun to recognize the strangeness and horror of it all. She was probably just mentally ill. That's the explanation I ultimately decided on. My brother has some interesting theories of his own, but I find them all silly and unrealistic. Either way, I doubt anything as unexplainable and as strange as what happened that night will ever happen to me again. My name's Jay, and fishing is one of life's greatest pleasures. I take every opportunity I can to get out on the water, whether it's a lake, river, or the marshes down here in Louisiana. This happened about 2 months ago when I was out with my friend Angel, who's just as obsessed with fishing as I am. We decided to go marsh fishing for speckled trout, something we'd done plenty of times before. The marshes around here are pretty shallow, so we took out my 2-person kayak like we always do. It was early spring, so it was still pretty cold outside, and the water was even colder, but we didn't care. We'd been paddling for about 30 minutes when we found a good spot that looked promising. The marsh seemed completely empty that day, no other fishermen around, which was exactly how we liked it. We cracked open a couple of beers and got right to the fishing, just enjoying the peace and quiet. We'd been fishing for maybe an hour when Angel hooked something decent, at least from the looks of it. As he was reeling it in, he got a little too excited and leaned over the side of the kayak to get a better angle. I knew what was about to happen the second before it did, but I couldn't speak up in time. As he was leaning over, I watched helplessly as his phone slid out of his jacket pocket and plunged into the muddy water. Safe to say, Angel was frustrated as hell. He said he had insurance that would cover damage to his phone, but not if it was completely lost. He said the replacement would cost several $100s that he didn't have, and I didn't fault him for it one bit. I'm not exactly drowning in cash myself. I told him we'd try to find it, even though the water was so murky you couldn't see more than a few inches down. We spent the next 20 minutes in that same area using our paddles to try and feel something hard on the bottom, but it was hopeless. The marsh bottom was all mud and vegetation, and even though both of us had seen the phone fall into the water, we started second-guessing where we should even be looking. Finally, I told Angel we weren't going to find it and we might as well try to salvage some enjoyment from the day, but he shook his head and said he wasn't leaving without that phone. Before I could stop him,
Angel started taking off his shoes and pants. He said he was going to wade into the marsh and try to feel around for the phone with his feet. I thought it wasn't a half bad idea, actually. At least it was better than poking around with paddles. The moment Angel stepped into the water, he let out a string of curses about how cold it was. That spot of the marsh was actually deeper than I'd expected, about 4.5 feet, judging by where the water came up on Angel's body. But he was determined, so he started feeling around with his feet in the area where he thought his phone had dropped. I watched from the kayak, getting more impatient by the minute. The water was so cold that I knew Angel couldn't stay in there for much longer, and I was hoping he'd either find the phone quickly or give up and get back on the kayak. But then, out of nowhere, Angel yelled out and his whole body flipped forward. 1 second he was standing upright in the water, and the next second he was completely submerged. At first I thought maybe he'd slipped on the muddy bottom, or maybe he'd actually found his phone and dove down to grab it. But after a few seconds passed without Angel resurfacing, I realized something was seriously wrong. I didn't even think. I just started yanking off my shoes and jacket, preparing to jump in after him. Before I could get in the water, though, Angel burst up from the marsh, covered head to toe in filthy muck and mud, and he was screaming at me to get out of there as fast as possible. I helped pull him back into the kayak, and we started paddling away from that spot as quickly as we could. Angel was shaking, and not just from the cold water by the looks of it. He kept looking back over his shoulder at the water like he expected something to follow us. Once we were a decent distance away, I asked him what had happened down there. Angel said that while he was feeling around for the phone with his feet, something had grabbed his ankle and yanked him under. He had a hard time describing what it felt like. He said it wasn't exactly a hand, but it wasn't a tentacle or a set of teeth either, just something that wrapped around his ankle with incredible strength. According to Angel, after he went under, whatever had grabbed him tried to drag him away from where we had been fishing. He said he fought against it with everything he had, kicking and struggling, until he finally managed to break free from its grip. We called it a day and headed back to the boat launch, despite Angel not having found his phone. But that clearly wasn't what was on his mind. The whole ride back, he barely said a word. I kept trying to convince him that maybe it had been a big catfish or an alligator gar that had grabbed him. But at the end of the day, I hadn't been the one to feel it, so I couldn't exactly convince him of anything. Angel insisted that what grabbed him didn't feel like any fish or animal he'd ever encountered. He was so unsettled and manic that I honestly started to feel spooked myself. I mean, what could that thing have been? My mind started wandering, and it didn't lead me anywhere good. I've been fishing those marshes for years, and I've never experienced anything like what Angel described. Even after doing a bunch of research online, I was never able to find anything conclusive. Part of me wants to go back to that spot and see if we could figure out what's down there, but I'm not eager to do that anytime soon. I will say that every time I've been marsh fishing since then, I felt this sense of unease that should never accompany something as enjoyable as fishing. This story happened about 2 months ago, and it's something I still think about from time to time. It was me, Kat, Nick, and Megan, the usual crew for weekend adventures. We'd been looking for something to do on a Saturday evening, and Nick brought up this reservoir near Megan's house that we'd been to several times before. It's kind of a classic spot amongst our friend group. Nick and I knew it was stocked with bass, so we were eager to get some fishing in since the two of us are pretty obsessed with the activity. Kat and Megan were just excited to drink a little at the water's edge and maybe go for a dip if they were feeling adventurous enough. Megan's house is way out in the sticks, and the reservoir is maybe a 10-minute drive away, followed by a short walk through some woods behind her neighborhood. It's technically county property, which is obvious from the many no trespassing signs posted every few yards along the chain link fence that surrounds it, but Megan had cut a hole in the fence ages ago. We laughed about it every time we went there, joking about how we'd found this perfect hidden spot that nobody else knew about. The reservoir itself is pretty small. It's surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides and a small access road on the 4th. The water's crystal clear, and there's this little sandy area where we usually set up. We call it the beach because of the sand and the fact that there are some flat rocks perfect for lounging on. It really is a nice spot. And since it's so secluded, we can blast music and be rowdy without worrying about disturbing anyone. The sun was already going down by the time we made it through the fence. Nick and I immediately started setting up our fishing gear,
even though we both knew we probably wouldn't be doing much fishing. The girls spread out a blanket and got right to the drinking. It was a vibe, especially since I had a little thing for Megan, and Nick for Kat. As the girls were debating going for a little dip, Kat pointed something out that none of us had noticed before. She was squinting down the bank, asking if we saw that canoe over there. We all looked in the direction she was pointing. Sure enough, a little ways down the shoreline was a canoe wedged into some reeds near the edge of the water. It was positioned oddly, like it had just drifted there without being tied off properly. The weird thing was, we'd been to the reservoir dozens of times over the past year alone, and none of us had ever seen a canoe there before. Nick and I are both pretty curious by nature, and the canoe was close enough that we figured we might as well go check it out. The girls seemed more interested in their music and drinks, so they waved us off when we said we're going to investigate. The walk along the bank took maybe 3 minutes. As we approached the canoe, I realized something was wrong. It wasn't just an empty canoe. It looked like someone had been using it recently and then just left. Like there was a fishing rod with its line still dangling into the water, alongside a tackle box lying open like someone had been digging through it. That wasn't the only thing. There was a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in plastic sitting on the seat. But the strangest thing by far was the phone. It was sitting right there on the main seat, locked but with the flashlight on. I pointed it out to Nick, asking who just leaves their phone behind like that. Nick shrugged, but I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. All the other stuff, the fishing gear, even the sandwich, could be explained easily. Maybe someone had heard us coming, knew they were trespassing, and took off before they could get caught. But leaving behind a perfectly good cell phone, that's not something any rational person does, no matter how scared they are. I looked at Nick and then back at the canoe, taking everything in at once. I know it doesn't sound super creepy, but in the moment, it was one of the creepiest things I'd ever seen. If you were there, you would have felt the same. There was still enough light out that we should have been able to see whoever the canoe belonged to if they were anywhere nearby. We looked around the immediate area, but there was no one there. Nick said it was weird, and I agreed completely. The two of us headed back to the girls and told them what we found. The more I described the contents of the canoe, the more unsettled I felt. I remember looking back over at it, feeling this rising feeling of foreboding as I watched it gently drift back and forth in the water. The four of us talked it over for a few minutes, throwing around theories, but none of our explanations really made sense when you factored in the phone. Kat said she wanted to get out of there, and honestly, I agreed. The whole situation was giving me a bad feeling. We started packing up our stuff when Megan gasped and pointed across the reservoir. I followed her gaze and literally had to do a double take. On the far side of the water was a person standing knee-deep in the reservoir. Even though the sun had just set, I could see them clearly. They had something long in their hands that looked like it could have been a fishing rod or maybe a stick. But what really freaked me out was the fact that they were just standing there perfectly still, facing in our direction. It dawned on me that they were watching us, and they probably had been for a while. All of a sudden, the creepiness of having seen that abandoned canoe turned into straight-up fear. None of us said it out loud, but I could tell we were all thinking the same thing. We needed to get out of there immediately. We grabbed our stuff and started heading back toward the fence. We weren't quite running, but we were moving fast. And then came the thing I had been dreading. That guy started yelling after us, screaming that we shouldn't be there and to get out. That's exactly what we were doing, but he didn't seem to care. He was belligerent, and the way he kept screaming and cursing made him sound like a lunatic. I didn't think it could get much worse than that, but I turned around just in time to see him drop whatever he had been holding and start moving into deeper water. It took me 2 seconds to realize what was happening. He was swimming across the reservoir. I screamed at my friends to run, and we took off. We sprinted back to the hole in the fence and squeezed through as fast as we could. I was in the back, and as I was crawling through, I could hear splashing from the direction of the water. I made it through, and the four of us booked it in the car and sped out of there as quickly as we could. For the next 20 minutes, we sat in Megan's driveway trying to make sense of what had happened. Kat was really shaken up, and Nick was trying to calm her down, but it didn't look like it was working. She was practically in tears, and I couldn't blame her. I was still pretty freaked out myself. None of us knew what to think. I wondered if that person screaming at us had been the owner of the canoe, and if so, why was their canoe all the way across the reservoir? And why were they in the reservoir in the first place? Or, and this is the one that really got to me, Had that person done something to whoever the canoe belonged to? But as Megan pointed out, that didn't make much sense considering the fact that they chased us, drawing unnecessary attention to themselves. Kat wanted to call the police, but what would we tell them? That we were trespassing and found an abandoned canoe? That someone yelled at us to get out of a place we weren't supposed to be in the first place? Not an option. It's been a few months since the incident, and we haven't been back to the reservoir since then. Part of me wants to go back there for answers, but I haven't been able to convince the girls, or even Nick, to come with me. It's probably for the best. I don't think I'm gonna forget about how creepy the whole thing was anytime soon, though. It happened on a night that I was the designated driver among my group of friends after a party. My friends were Michael, Eddie, and Daniela. We live in the country, so anytime we wanted to go to the bars or parties, we'd have to travel long distances. That's why it's such a big deal for one of us to be sober enough to drive. We were driving down the 513, which is an unlit highway littered with the occasional house or two, but mostly forest. The road leads to town where most of the bars are. This story takes place on the way back from town. Daniela started to cry that she had to piss really bad. I told her she'd have to wait a while longer, but not gonna lie, I started to get the urge as well. That mixed with the fact that Daniela was now screaming in her drunken fit, I figured why not pull over to the side of the road and just piss somewhere in the woods. Daniela got out first and disappeared into the crops on one side. I went to the opposite side of the road and slightly into the woods just because I'm the type of person who can't have people watching me piss. I finished first and got back in the car. Eddie and Michael were singing to the roaring rap music playing on the radio, while I pretty much just sat there in silence, growing impatient. My two drunk friends didn't seem to find anything strange about the fact that Daniela had now been gone for 5 minutes, so I got back out to call her name. Michael has a much stronger voice than I, so when he screamed for her, it would be impossible for her not to hear. But still, she didn't call back. I didn't want to go in those crops, but I kind of felt like I had to since she's my friend, and I was the most aware at that moment. I forced Michael to come with since I was afraid to go in alone. Eddie stayed in the car, he was just too far gone at this point. With the flashlight from my glove box, Michael and I pushed our way through the thick, overgrown crops, walking in the only direction we could think to go, straight away from the car. Michael was calling Danielle's name while laughing his ass off. I could understand why he was finding it funny in his condition, but I just wanted to make sure she was alright and get home. Over the sounds of her own footsteps brushing crops aside, and Michael's laughter, I heard something else in the near vicinity. I put my arm out to Michael's chest to halt him. Now all that could be heard was the night breeze blowing through the crops. "What is it?" Michael whispered, to which I responded, "Shh." "That." Michael called out Daniela's name again. I joined in, figuring it was just her trying to sneak up on us and scare us, and again the footsteps stopped. So we walked a little deeper into the crops. That's when we came to a narrow clearing stretch. I don't know much about crops and farming or anything, but it seemed to be some little stretch for people to walk through. It was probably the width of 2 people, just enough to walk through. I looked to my left, as far down as the light would let me see, and then to the right. I could hear 3 footsteps, and then a couple crops pushed outward into the opening, as somebody stepped into view. At first my light was only revealing their legs, so by default under the circumstances I assumed it was Michael. However, the light revealed it to be not Michael, but instead some random man who I'd never seen before. His facial features weren't clear enough to give a good description, but he didn't look friendly. I ran for it back in the only direction I remembered coming from. I guess I ran so fast that it only took me about 10 seconds to make it back to the car. Eddie was passed out in the car at this point, so I didn't bother trying to get help from him. I was honking the horn to get Michael's and hopefully Daniela's attention. The sight of that man just disturbed me. I didn't know if he owned this land or not. I continued to land the horn until finally, Michael came out of the crops dragging Daniela, who seemed to be out cold. I got out to help him lift her back inside of the car and plop her on the seat. Michael pointed out the gash on her forehead, as if she had been struck with a heavy, sharp object. Michael seemed to be sobering up pretty quickly due to the situation. He advised I drive to the nearest hospital, which was 10 minutes away. The drive there was not fun. It was full of panic and yelling. We brought Daniela in to have her wound treated as soon as possible. It was only then that Michael explained to the nurses, not me, that he saw some guy dragging her collapsed, unconscious body before fleeing deeper into the crops after noticing him. He never mentioned that in the car, but it made perfect sense now. That man in the crops with us that night did this. Daniela was awake after she got all stitched up, and she had no recollection of the entire night, from the moment we stepped into the party to the moment she got struck in the head. 12:17, according to the green clock shining bright from my car's dashboard. I still remember that number as I was driving home from the night shift at the pharmacy I worked at. Taking the highway at this hour is a little dangerous since there's no lights, usually no other cars at that hour, and commonly deer would walk out onto the road, and you wouldn't notice them until it'd be too late if they were in your direct path. That's why I always drive slow on it, 50 max. As the road curved to the left, a clear row of reflective lights appeared in the horizon, which I quickly realized was the reflective tape of a row of traffic cones, as well as a flashing blue light in the distance. In front of them seemed to be the reflective material on a safety vest. I was so confused trying to figure out what the hell this was about that it didn't even hit me that I should be slamming on the brakes until it was almost too late. The car came to a halting stop as the horrid screeching of my tires stopped, and the man wearing the reflective vest started walking over to my car, arms out waving. I guess he was telling me not to move the car. As the man got closer, I could see what appeared to be a police uniform under the vest. He knocked on my window with the joint of his pointer finger, so I took that as lower your window. I rolled down the window, better revealing the man's face. To give a good description, he was black, about 6 foot, skinny, slight stubble, and a left earring. He was kind of young, I'd have to guess around 25. He spoke in a very low, non-commanding voice, especially for an officer. He said, "License and registration, please." I paused for a second and asked if I did something wrong, because I definitely wasn't speeding. He paused as well and looked slightly to the left and then back at me. "Sir, this is a sobriety checkpoint," he said in once again a very non-commanding voice. I asked why he would need my ID and registration then if I had not yet been suspected of anything. He leaned back from my car and asked me to step out of the vehicle to begin the test. I opened my door and stepped out. Immediately I noticed the cop towered over me in height. He took a roll of tape out from his vest pocket and laid it down onto the ground, stretching it to a length of about 15 feet. He told me to step on the end of the roll of tape and place my arms out to my sides as I walk across the tape in a straight line. I easily did it with no issues, with the cop directly behind me the whole time, uncomfortably close. When I got to the end of the roll of tape, I could more easily see that blue flashing light. It wasn't sitting on top of a police car, it was sitting on some older, small sedan. I looked back at him and asked to see his badge, and he just looked at me with the blankest stare. It started to sink in, and I literally mean that, because I felt like my heart was sinking. This guy wasn't a cop. He said something next that I couldn't quite distinguish at first, but as he got to his car, I assumed he said, "I'll go get it 1 second." He was bent over into his car grabbing something. While he was distracted, I ran back to the car. He looked at me as I started the car and raised a gun up to me. It goes without saying I put the pedal to the floor as the car jumped into an acceleration through the traffic cones. I saw the headlights of the guy's car go on as I was a few hundred feet away, but at that point I was already going over 60, and there was no way he'd be catching me. I got off at the next exit, and as soon as there were street lights around, I turned off my car lights to draw less attention as I finished the drive to my house. I only wish I had a dash cam at the time so I could have gotten it on video. I swear it would have wound up on the news. I was taking a drive from Maine to Upper New York to spend the week with family. I left right after work around 5:30, so I didn't anticipate getting there until past 1 in the morning. I had the top to my Jeep Wrangler off so I could enjoy the hot weather. I was somewhere in Vermont well past midnight when the gas light flicked on and the car started beeping. Unfortunately, the gas gauge in the car was broken, so there was no way to gauge how much gas was left. I was told by my brother, who drove the car the previous day, that he filled it up to the top, but clearly he was either mistaken or lying, because I had not used anywhere near a full tank's worth of gas. One of those blue service signs zoomed past. I could see a gas station symbol in one of the boxes, so I turned off that exit onto a desolate road, which surely led to some kind of civilization. I wouldn't be finding out anytime soon, however, because the car started jittering and bumping around a bit, making weird noises that didn't sound good at all. A few seconds later, the acceleration stopped, and the car came to a helpless halt. I couldn't believe it, but I actually ran out of gas. I hopped out of the car and got on the phone with AAA, telling them my exact location. They said they could have a guy out to me in at least 20 minutes. I was grateful, but at the same time annoyed that I'd be waiting now for at least 20 minutes. For about 15 minutes, I kind of just strolled around my car slowly, looking down at my phone, texting friends about the situation, and checking social medias. It was so quiet. No sounds of distant traffic, no passing cars, just the sound of crickets and other night creatures in the woods. Then, I heard something walking around in the woods. The footsteps were decently heavy, so I had a hunch it was a deer or something. But the possibility of it being a bear wasn't far-fetched, given that this was bear country. I walked around to the passenger side of the car now, where the woods were, and where the sounds were coming from, just in hopes of seeing a deer or some other harmless animal. Then there were 2 clapping sounds. Like, it actually sounded like a person clapping their hands. I moved a little closer to listen for it again. This time it was 3 claps. I called out to the woods, hoping in some weird way that someone would answer. But after I did, the clapping didn't happen anymore. I just stood there waiting for something to happen, but it was just silence. So I got back in the car and just waited. I heard footsteps once again coming from the woods, coming in my direction. Then it just stopped. I looked outside and saw it. The head, peeking from behind a tree, just ahead. It almost looked lifeless. The eyes, they just looked so lifeless I couldn't even tell if they were looking at me or not. I was so focused on these details, I didn't even think to scream at the horror of what I was witnessing. I cranked the windows up on both sides and turned off the headlights. However, hiding in the car didn't make me feel much safer since the entire top was off. Without the headlights on, there was complete darkness. I couldn't see 2 inches in front of me, yet I was surrounded by the night noises of the forest. I was ducking down below the dashboard, doors locked yet still completely exposed to the outside, praying not to hear any sudden sounds like footsteps. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach, however, as I heard someone grab the car door handle. I tried my best not to move or make any noise. I was waiting for someone to start pounding at the glass, or at the very least reach around the opening behind the front door to just unlock it. I was so exposed it wasn't even funny. And then, I felt a hand aggressively grab onto my back. I simply lost it and screamed at the top of my lungs. But suddenly the hand released its grip on my shirt as light began to fill the area, and the sound of a truck engine pulling up the road was music to my ears. I sat up and turned around to see the headlights of a AAA truck. but whoever was grabbing me was long gone already. I ran outside to greet the man who stepped out. He was a big dude in his 40s. I basically cried to him about what just happened, taking huge breaths in between each sentence. Something about his personality and presence was just calming and reassuring, however. He filled my car up with gas, and we both went on our ways. Even though something about that man's aura just calmed me down, the memory of what happened that night is still haunting, and the image of that lifeless head peering around that tree is imprinted in my brain. So I've actually got two stories that I think are worth hearing, and they're both related to each other. My name is David. I used to work late nights at a gas station / convenience store out in the middle of nowhere. This was forever ago, which I'm only mentioning because it was back before every establishment had state-of-the-art security systems and cameras covering every square inch of their property. It's not like security systems didn't exist, more so that it wasn't much of a priority. Plus, the owner was cheap. But anyway, I didn't care because the job was laughably easy. The most difficult part of working there was honestly the owner. He legitimately had the mind of a goldfish. We'd have the same two arguments multiple times a week, and it was almost like this guy forgot what we argued about every time because he'd constantly repeat himself and bring up things we'd already addressed. But whatever. Here's everything you need to know. Most nights, it was just me in there from 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning, and the place didn't see much traffic. That's about it. Anyway, one night, I'm pretty sure it was during the week, I was doing what I always did, leaning against the counter with a magazine in hand, trying to prevent the boredom from putting me to sleep. It was really late. I don't remember exactly what time it was, since the store had the remarkable ability to blend all the ungodly hours of the night into one lump of misery. But the store was dead silent. You know that faint buzzing noise those old fluorescent lights make? That was the only noise I'd hear in hours, and my brain had gotten numb to it, which I guess explains why I was so startled when the front door chimed. I looked up, and there was a man walking in. He was this tall, 30-something looking black guy with an above-average build. My first thought was ex-pro athlete, but then I looked at him a little more closely. Here's the thing, and I can't overstate how jarring this was. He was quite literally covered in blood, or I guess it could have been red paint, but I knew it wasn't. It was everywhere. There was a huge splatter across his chest for one, not to mention the streaks on his face and arms. It was a cartoonish amount of blood, which is why my brain took so long to process it. It was one of those unique sights that paralyzes your brain for a few moments because it doesn't fit any familiar category of lived experience. But what really got me were his eyes. They were just empty. I don't know how else to describe them. There was nothing behind them. It legit looked like he was just walking into the gas station at 2 a.m. on any other night. He looked perfectly normal, like he was relaxed and almost bored. It was like he didn't even know he was drenched in what was very clearly blood. I'm describing all of this in vivid detail so that my reaction makes sense. I don't want to come across as some pathetic loser. It was genuinely a terrifying situation. I was completely frozen, and all I could do was stare at the guy, which was probably the last thing I wanted to be doing. I couldn't help myself. Every time I was able to look away, my gaze immediately snapped right back to his eyes. He noticed, obviously, which wasn't too surprising. I mean, I was quite literally staring at him. I'm not sure what I was expecting him to do, but I definitely was not expecting him to smile at me. And then he said, calm as anything, "Don't worry, it's not my blood." As if that was supposed to make me feel any better. It didn't. My brain immediately started the emergency alarms, that this guy is a murderer. He might have just killed someone. He might kill me. Those were the only thoughts running through my brain, and I was freaking the fuck out. But then my survival instincts kicked in, and I started acting like everything was normal. I nodded at him like he had said something normal about the weather, and I buried my head back in the magazine. I watched him walk through the aisles like nothing was wrong. He grabbed some random stuff and came up to pay. I was actually kind of surprised that he wasn't going to just steal the items. I probably would have let him. I rang him up, careful not to look him in the eyes. The nightmare was almost over. He paid in cash, didn't say anything else, and left. The door chimed and he was gone, as simply as that. The second I heard a car engine start somewhere out in the parking lot, I grabbed the phone and called 911. I told them what I saw, and I tried to describe the guy as accurately as possible. I told them I didn't really know what had happened, but I was positive that something happened. The dispatcher was asking some clarifying questions when everything went sideways. I was mid-sentence when the door chimed again. Great, another customer. That was the last thing I wanted to deal with, but I was wrong. It wasn't another customer. It was him again, the guy I was in the middle of reporting to the police. He looked absolutely furious. I hung up the phone as fast as I could, but it was too late. He knew what I was doing. He must have seen me through the window. He stormed up to the counter and started demanding to know if I'd called the cops. I denied it, but he wasn't buying it. Not even a little. Things escalated quickly. He started cursing at me, telling me to mind my business and that he knew I was lying. I just put my hands up and didn't say anything, trying to defuse things as best I could, but there was nothing I could do. His voice was getting louder, and those empty eyes were suddenly filled with rage. At first, I thought he was just going to yell at me, but I saw it a second too late. He jumped across the counter and attacked me before I could do anything. I don't mean he climbed over it. I mean he launched himself across the counter and tackled me to the ground before I could even react. In all of 2 seconds, he went from screaming at me to strangling me, and I was fighting for my life. I thought I was going to die. I had never been in a physical altercation before that night, and I was certain this guy was trying to end my life. I thrashed around wildly, kicking, scratching, biting even. I was just trying to survive. I could feel his blood, or whoever's blood it was, all over me, smearing my clothes and face. We were still rolling around on the floor when I resorted to my final option. I screamed that I had a gun, and I wasn't afraid to use it. A complete bluff, of course. Something about the way I said it must have been convincing, though, because he stopped punching me. He scrambled off and bolted for the door. I was still on the ground in a painful haze when I heard his car speed out of the parking lot. I didn't even get up at first. I just laid there for a while, covered in a mix of someone else's and my blood. The police showed up maybe 10 minutes later. When they saw the state I was in, they immediately left and tried to track the guy down. I never heard from them again. There was nothing about it on the news either, so I was completely in the dark. The experience was by far the scariest physical thing that has ever happened to me. Okay, if you thought that was crazy, I promise you this one's worse. A few months after the first incident, I was still working at the same gas station, which was probably my first mistake considering what happened. But I needed the money. Also, there was a part of me that had convinced myself it was just a freak occurrence. A one-time thing that had no chance of ever happening again. But that's not the case. It was another late night when the next thing happened. Looking back, the circumstances surrounding the night were pretty much identical to that of the first incident. It was a late night, I was alone in the store, dying of boredom, etc. So anyway, this guy walks in the store and immediately catches my eye. The first strange thing I noticed was that he was wearing a suit, and not just any suit. This thing looked expensive. It was dark gray and perfectly tailored. He had no business being anywhere near a gas station past midnight dressed like that. My first thought was that he must be coming from a wedding, or maybe some kind of corporate event. I mean, there had to be some kind of explanation for what he was doing. But even important people don't walk into gas stations in the middle of nowhere wearing nice suits. That just doesn't really happen, and I would know. The guy didn't browse or even so much as glance at the aisles. He clearly wasn't hiding his intentions, or just didn't care enough to. Instead, he walked right up to me. He didn't speak or even look at me. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. At first, I was beyond confused, but then I looked down at the picture, and I couldn't believe my eyes. It was a picture of that guy, That guy who had come into the store with blood all over himself and tried to kill me. The photo wasn't 100% clear, but I was sure it was unmistakably the same person. I tried to mask my surprise, but I don't think I did a good job. I kept my face glued to the photo, but I could feel that man watching me. He didn't say anything at first, and when I looked up to meet his gaze, he just stared at me, like he was studying my face or reading my mind. I wasn't sure if he was expecting me to say something, so I didn't. It was painfully awkward, and then, after a really uncomfortably long pause, he finally spoke. His voice was surprisingly gruff, almost like he had just smoked a full pack of cigarettes. He asked me if I had ever seen that man before, and I immediately said I hadn't. It felt like the right answer, even if I couldn't explain it at the time. I just didn't want to get involved in any kind of illicit activity that was going on, and my gut was screaming, "Deny, deny, deny." The guy didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with these cold, calculating eyes that I couldn't read. It was really unnerving, especially given what he was asking me about. The silence was excruciating, and with every passing second, I lost confidence in the believability of my lie. Still though, I wasn't budging, and I was still pretty sure I had given a convincing answer. I won our little implicit standoff, and the guy finally reached down and picked up the photograph. As soon as he turned his back, I let out a huge sigh of relief, thinking everything was over. I watched him walk through the store toward the door, but right before he opened it, he stopped, and he turned back around to face me one more time, and then he just said, "I know you're lying." And then, before I could even respond, he was gone. I was pretty shocked by the whole encounter, more than I wanted to admit to myself. Being in that store all alone didn't feel safe anymore, and I didn't really know what to think. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what the hell had just happened. Who was that guy? How did he know about the first incident? I wondered if he was a cop or detective, or if he was something else entirely. Someone connected to whatever that blood-covered man had been involved in. That's the thought that really freaked me out. I pretty quickly reasoned that if he had been someone official like a cop, he would have revealed his identity to me, which could only signify bad news. I didn't end up calling the police that time, partly because I wasn't sure what I'd even say, and partly because of the PTSD over what happened the last time I called the police. Nothing happened for a while after that night, though. I was a little shaken, yeah, and part of me was expecting something else to happen that night, but nothing did. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I started thinking something might have actually been wrong. I started noticing the same silver SUV in various spots throughout my day. At first, it was parked across the street from the gas station during my daytime shifts, which was normal enough, but then I noticed it in the parking lot of the grocery store I went to, which was a touch stranger. Once I saw it on my street, the alarm bells started to go off again. I'm not a paranoid person by nature, but when you see the same vehicle in several different locations over the course of 2 weeks, you start to wonder. I had a feeling I knew who it was, and I told myself the next time I saw the car, I would call the police and report it as discreetly as possible. I knew it was that guy who had walked into the store that night in a suit. It had to be him. The worst part about it all was not knowing how he'd figured out where I lived. Somehow he tracked me down. You have to remember, I lived alone at the time. It's not like I had protection at home or a lot of people to consult on this. I don't know why, but I convinced myself things would blow over if I just ignored it. And of course, that was an awful way to proceed. About 3 weeks after he'd first shown up, I was jerked awake in the middle of the night by the sound of glass shattering. My first reaction wasn't to freeze or flee, but to fight. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept under my bed and ran into the living room. There was no one there, which I was able to determine in just a few minutes because the house was pretty small. There was something, though. There, sitting in the middle of the living room floor, surrounded by broken glass, was a rock. Just a plain rock, maybe the size of a fist. There was no note attached to it, but I understood what it meant. In that moment, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. That guy had clearly been stalking me, and he was clearly involved in something awful and was trying to tell me something. I didn't know what that thing was, but I knew I wanted no part of it, so I caved. I quit my job the next day and started looking for other places to live. It took me a little over a month to find a nondescript apartment a few towns over, and I figured that was good enough. In that moment, I didn't see the SUV one time, but my mind was made up. and nothing happened after that. I was finally at peace, and I was actually able to find another job relatively easily. I ended up moving again not even a year later, this time way out of state, and that was that. But I still think about both experiences from time to time. Even though the first encounter was probably more life-threatening, it's the second one that gets me. I was never able to figure out why someone would go through all that trouble, stalking, harassment, intimidation, just because I'd called the cops on someone covered in blood. The only explanation I could think of was that he somehow thought I had a connection to that first guy, and I was harboring him or sheltering him or something. It's been years, and I've accepted that I'll probably never figure out the truth behind any of what happened. This happened about 8 months ago. The night in question, I was heading back from a job site about 3 hours from my house. I was beat. The job had taken longer than expected, and I didn't have the amount of caffeine in my system such exhausting work required. By the time I got back on the road, it was already past 10. I know a 3-hour drive doesn't sound too intense, but I had been working so hard that even the simple task of keeping my eyes open was a chore. Plus, my truck is several years old. I don't drive a fancy vehicle with assisted driving or anything like that, so it's not like I had the comfort of knowing my car would help with the drive. About 45 minutes in, I knew I needed to stop. My eyelids were doing that thing where they just kind of drift down on their own, and I was having to physically shake my head to stay alert. So I pulled into the next gas station off the highway. It was around 11 at that point. I filled up my tank, smoked a cigarette, and kind of stood there debating what to do. I still had over 2 hours of driving ahead of me, and I knew there was no way I'd make it. So I made the decision to take a quick nap and finish the drive afterward. I drove to the corner of the parking lot and turned my engine off. I was just going to go to sleep for a few hours right there. I've slept in worse places, it didn't seem like a big deal. I was out almost instantly. When my alarm went off, it felt like I had blinked and an hour had passed. I still wasn't fully rested, but I was definitely more alert than before, which was good enough for me. The lot was completely empty now. There had been at least 2 other cars there when I pulled in, and they were both gone. Without as much as a second thought, I started my truck and pulled back onto the highway. Things were fine for maybe the first 20 minutes. The highway was dead, and I was kind of zoning out. Not falling asleep per se, but just letting muscle memory take over. I was essentially on autopilot. At one point, I realized my truck was making some strange noises. It actually took my brain a few minutes to process what I was hearing as abnormal. That's how zoned out I was. I turned the AC down so I could hear things more clearly. There was this faint thumping sound coming from somewhere behind me. I turned around a few times, but didn't see any loose items bouncing around in the back seat or anything like that. I figured it was just something shifting around in the truck bed. One of my tools, maybe. Beyond speculating, there wasn't much else I could do. The situation didn't really warrant me pulling over, so I made a mental note to check it when I got back home, and I kept driving. The sounds continued, though. It actually started to bother me, and I ended up cranking the radio to drown it out. At one point, I slammed my hand against the hood of the truck and cursed out of frustration. Strangely, that seemed to work. For maybe 10 minutes after that, things were quiet. I was relieved, not because the noise was worrying me, but because it was genuinely ticking me off. The adrenaline from getting so worked up had woken me up a bit more, which was a good thing. But that increased alertness also cleared some of the brain fog, and I started thinking about how odd it was for a sound being made by an inanimate object to stop so abruptly as a result of my outburst. I had already eliminated the possibility that a faulty part in my truck had been making the sound, so the fact that slapping the hood could have caused it to stop was such a weird coincidence. I was in my head about it, debating whether I should stop or not, when out of nowhere, I heard a deafening crack come from directly behind me. It was not a normal sound, and it definitely wasn't a normal crack either. It was more like a crash, like someone had thrown a rock against one of my windows. The next 30 seconds were pure chaos and terror. I turned around in shock, and what I saw nearly made me lose control of my vehicle. There was a person standing in my truck bed, banging on the glass divider between the truck bed and the back seat with one of my tools. It was dark, but I could clearly see him. He was banging on the glass repeatedly.
like a wild animal trying to claw its way out of a cage. The way he was moving was truly barbaric. I can't overstate that enough. I swerved uncontrollably, partly out of fear and partly to try and shake him off. I lost control of the truck and started spinning out of control. I genuinely thought I was going to flip, but all I could think about was the maniac who was trying to smash his way through the glass. I somehow managed to wrestle the truck back under control, and I skidded to a halt halfway between the right lane and the shoulder. I was too disoriented and terrified to think about how lucky I had been to avoid a wreck. And the moment my head stopped spinning, I ripped off my seatbelt. I don't know what came over me. I'm not the bravest person, and I wasn't armed, but I knew I wanted to do something. I couldn't just sit there. I had to confront the psycho in the truck bed, if he was even still there. I threw the door open and ran around the truck. As I was approaching the truck bed, I saw a man in a hoodie climbing out. He jumped onto the ground and started running for the tree line off the side of the highway. I chased him for a few seconds before realizing that was a terrible decision. It was pitch black out there. I had no idea if he was armed, and we were completely alone. Wherever my bout of confidence had come from, it didn't last. In a matter of seconds, I was terrified all over again. I ran back to my truck and sped off without even looking back to see where that guy went. I drove for a little while and then pulled over again to inspect the damage to my truck. My brain was genuinely in shock. I couldn't think straight, and I started to feel what I can only describe as a panic attack. I calmed myself down and got out of the truck. The glass divider was destroyed. It wasn't completely shattered, but there were so many cracks in it that one more forceful impact would have taken it out. I climbed into the bed of my truck to see what he had been hitting the glass with, but something caught my attention before I could even figure it out. There was a foreign object in there that I didn't recognize. It definitely wasn't a tool. It took me a few seconds to realize what I was looking at. It was a trash bag. It was wrapped over on itself multiple times, like someone had been trying to keep it really secure. And it was small too, like the size of 2 fists. It looked wet, and as I crouched down to get a better look, I realized it smelled disgusting. It smelled rancid, like rotting meat or food. I didn't want to touch it, but I needed it out of my truck. I needed to be as far away from that bag as possible. So as gingerly as I could, I grabbed it and quickly chucked it toward the tree line. I didn't give things another thought. I immediately got back in the driver's seat and started driving away. As I was pulling out, I looked down at my hands and realized they were tinted slightly red. The bag had been coated in something red that was now all over my hands. It was sickening, but there was nothing I could do besides drive. I rubbed my hands on my jeans and tried to just make it home without going insane. I ended up keeping the incident to myself. I didn't involve the police, and it wasn't until weeks later that I even told my friends about what happened. I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter for days afterwards. I got a friend of mine to fix my glass a few days later without asking questions, and that was pretty much that. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't affected by what happened. Looking back, the only explanation that makes sense is that he climbed into the bed of my truck while I was asleep at the gas station, which makes sense because I don't have a bed cover. But he must have been lying completely flat there for most of the drive too, otherwise I would have seen him. I've never been in a life or death situation like that before. It was by far the most terrifying thing I've ever gone through.
Remember Chuck E. Cheese? That old arcade with the singing animatronics? Of course you do. I just found out they went bankrupt recently. It made me think back to my horrible experience there as a very little kid. I was no older than 8 or 9. It was like my third and last time ever at a Chuck E. Cheese. This specific location closed down years ago, but it used to be basically down the street from our old house. My mom took my little brother and I, and she let us roam free and do our own thing and play the games, while she sat at one of the tables reading like most of the other parents. I was playing this clown game where you had to shoot the clown's teeth out with this little cannonball shooter. I was playing the games that would get me the most tickets for the prizes. I finished the game again, and the tickets shot out from the ticket slot. That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned and jumped in my seat. I was greeted with a giant Chuck E. Cheese mascot in my face. He held out his hand for a high five, and naturally I gave him his high five with a smile. He then pointed at the tickets and gave me a thumbs up. I think I just continued laughing and smiling and said yeah. Then he pointed at the tickets once more and motioned for me to follow him. So I ripped the tickets from the slot and followed the giant mascot. As we walked across the main floor, a couple other kids around like 6 came up to him saying, "Hey Chucky," and he gave them both high fives. I kept following him, wondering if he'd tell the other kids to follow, but he didn't. He would turn back every few seconds to make sure I was still following. Finally, we made it across the main floor by the stage towards this back area, where he waved me to follow him through this employees-only door. From what I remember about how I was feeling, let's just say a combination of weird and excited. We entered this narrow hallway, and I felt kind of special for being allowed access back here. Keep in mind, I had the mind and maturity of a very young child. The mascot led me to this back room where he motioned for me to enter first, so I did. It was this small changing room type of room. It had a few lockers on one wall and one long bench extending half the length of the room. That was it. He entered the room and shut the door behind us, and I noticed he locked it. That's when I became confused and afraid. I thought he was taking me to get a bunch of free tickets. What could he possibly do in this empty room with me? He approached me, put his furry mascot hand on my shoulder, and then started rubbing from my shoulder to my arm. Then he seemed as though he tried to reach lower with both of his hands, and I pushed him off and yelled, "Stop." That's when the person in the suit lifted the mask off his head, revealing some sweaty, middle-aged man underneath. He started to remove the rest of the costume from himself as he told me to be quiet. I sat there watching, shaking, and plotting my way for the door. When I thought he was distracted enough by the suit, I tried to run past him for the door, but he grabbed me and told me to stop. He offered me all the free tickets I wanted if I just behaved. I started to yell and pound on the door. He tried to cover my mouth, but I think he gave up when he realized it wasn't worth the risk for him. I unlocked the door and ran back down the hall in tears. I ran back to my mom, yelling at her about what just happened. She was distraught and went right to the front desk. The girl at the front desk seemed to be in a panic as well, and I think she called for her supervisor. Pretty soon, all the music was stopped and the place was put into a lockdown of sorts, where all the kids were to go to their parents. A bunch of workers ran to the back section, and eventually police showed up outside. I had to give my whole story to a crowd of like 6 people, and I was extremely nervous. The man in the Chucky suit was some random creep who snuck into the back section of the building to dress in one of the suits and apparently lure children to the back. Realizing and looking back at that now as a grown adult is disturbing and disgusting, that I was the victim of a predator. I never found out if that monster was caught. I used to work for Chuck E. Cheese very briefly when I was 21 years old. I was one of the janitors/maintenance workers. I know, not very awe-inspiring. I was broke as hell and needed money. All my job really entailed was cleaning tables and keeping the play areas generally clean. Sounds easy, but there was never really a time to just sit and take a breath. There was always something to clean or take care of. I would also be in charge of turning on and off the animatronics, opening the stage curtains, fixing busted arcade machines, and things of that nature. My shifts would always be later, from like 4 to 10 p.m. My location closed at 8 on weekdays and 9 on weekends. I would stay an hour, sometimes 2 hours after, to get the place in top shape ready for the next day. So this one night, I was working past close like I usually did. Everyone had already left the building, including the other workers, so I was the last one in the building. I was dragging my cleaning cart around the arcade area. I had already turned off all the game machines. I was by that space-themed arcade machine where you had to press the button at the right moment to stop the light on the jackpot bulb. As I was passing by this machine, the space-themed music suddenly emits from the machine at a very loud volume, and all the lights start flashing again. I felt like my heart was in my throat, that's how much it startled me. I fiddled with my keys to access the control port of the machine to turn it off again. I'd never seen anything like that happen before. It suddenly just freaked me out. only because I was all alone in that big building pretty late at night. The weirdness didn't stop there though. By this point in the night, I had already shut down the animatronics on the stage, so when I heard Chucky's pre-recorded laugh break the silence of the room, my heart started pounding again. The laugh was short and cut off. It almost sounded glitchy. I ditched my cleaning cart to go backstage and check on the animatronics, and I could see they were in their idle modes now, meaning they would move their limbs and heads around every so often. I would have to go to the control room to turn them off, but this was the second strange thing to happen that night. I started getting paranoid that someone else was in the building with me, but that thought was interrupted when I noticed that the Chucky animatronic was facing me, and its head angled down perfectly to look as though it was looking at me. It was bizarre. Bizarre that I was finding it that disturbing. I'm not crazy, but for my own peace of mind, with my eyes on the Chucky animatronic, I walked past it, closer to the control room. I waited there for a few seconds, and then the animatronic spun 90 degrees to face me once more, perfectly. I swear it was once again looking right at me, and then the laughter emitted once again from the animatronic. But in a creepy, glitchy, cut-off manner, this time much louder, obviously because I was right next to it. I ran to the control room to hit the switch to turn everything off on the stage once more. I left the control room, and the Chucky animatronic was still facing the direction it was moments before. I left the stage through the curtain and just felt uneasy. I was starting to think maybe it was all just getting to my head. But that's when I heard the horrible laugh again come from the stage behind the curtains. That was the last straw. I took my card, clocked out, and left. I texted my boss the next day that I had to leave early because I was feeling extremely sick. He said it wasn't a problem, but he never mentioned anything about the animatronics being left on. And when I asked him if the animatronics had some kind of motion detecting feature to look at people, he said no, they didn't. I'm not the most superstitious guy, but I firmly believe I wasn't the only presence in that building that night. And I don't mean there was another person in there. This is a story from my childhood that I don't like to look back on too much. I was 13. My mom brought my two little sisters and I to Chuck E. Cheese one evening. My sisters are 4 and 6 years younger than me, so it was more for them, and my mom just wanted me to come along. My mom was playing games with my sisters, so I went to do my own thing. It was my only time ever at Chuck E. Cheese, so I was trying to play every game at least once. Eventually, a worker in a red polo shirt came up to me. He was in his lower to mid-20s, I'd say. He didn't seem that old. He asked me if I wanted some more tokens. I said, yeah, sure. He told me to follow him. He led me through this sketchy back door, which led to a back exit. I asked him where he was leading me. He said to his truck. He told me not to tell anyone, but that he had access to all the tokens he wanted and just kept piles of them in his car. I stopped following when I realized he was leading me to his car. I told him my mom would be mad. He tried to push that I follow him a little more, but gave up. Before I walked back inside, he asked for my AIM username, and I gave it to him, always excited for new friends on AIM. For those of you who don't know, AIM was an instant messenger that was all the rage before smartphones and texting really became a thing. I don't remember his username. All I know, it was something with his name in it, which was Ben. I would sign on to AIM every single night, including that night after Chuck E. Cheese. I signed in, and I had a few friends online. Next thing I knew, I got a message from Ben, so I added him to my buddy list. He said, hey, it's Ben from earlier. I replied, what's up, and we started chatting. He chatted with me as if we were good friends already. I asked him how he was able to get all the tokens he wanted, and he said it's easy when you work there. He told me he was going to come to my house that night with a bunch of tokens. I told him, no, it's okay. And he told me, no, it's fine. You live really close to me anyway. I replied, how do you know where I live? And he said he followed my mom's van on our way home. I blocked his account immediately. I was beyond scared. I told my friends about it on AIM. Some of them said I should tell my parents or call the police. But I waited. Maybe he was bluffing. But no, he wasn't. I heard a truck pull up outside through my open window. I looked out the window and saw the black truck that Ben guy was leading me towards earlier. I saw him get out from the truck, and I know he spotted me because he started walking over to my window. I pulled the window in and locked it, and then shut the blind. By that point, he was already halfway to my window, and he was waving his arms at me. I ran to my mom to tell her. She didn't find it funny, thinking I was kidding at first, but I convinced her after she looked out the window and saw the black truck begin to speed down the road. My mom wanted me to show her the AIM conversation, but I couldn't, as I had deleted him off my buddy list and blocked him. My parents called the police, of course, but that was just for peace of mind. They couldn't do anything besides make a report. The next day, my mom called the Chuck E. Cheese and asked about a Ben. They said they had no Bens who worked there. There were also no employees matching that guy's description. The Chuck E. Cheese eventually handed the CCTV footage from the day before to the police department for an investigation, which turned up no results. My family never went to a Chuck E. Cheese ever again. Every so often when we were little, our parents would go away for a weekend while our Uncle Ron would watch us. Our Uncle Ron has been single his whole life, but he always loved kids, so he always happily did it. One Friday night, the same night our parents left town, we were all watching Titanic during a monster snowstorm. Me, my two brothers, my older sister, and our Uncle Ron. I remember certain parts of this night so vividly, but other parts I just draw blanks. I do remember, however, that the power flicked off briefly, and we had to reset the VCR to get back to where we were in the movie. Shortly after that, our Uncle Ron was fast asleep. We let him sleep while we kept watching the movie. It was at the part where Rose was running with the axe back to the room that Jack was trapped in. One of my brothers was coming back from the bathroom, and on his way, he went outside for whatever reason, likely just to look at the snow. He came back inside yelling for us to come take a look at something. Starved for a little excitement, I guess, the three of us ran to the back door. We could see what he was talking about now. There was a set of footprints in the snow. It led from the back door, then to the window, and then back in the direction of the yard and woods. To make the matter even more eerie, he said he heard the back doorknob turn. Our sister, even though she was the oldest by 3 years, ran inside freaking out. My brothers and I, on the other hand, were kind of excited by it and wanted to follow the footprints. Our sister was threatening to wake up our Uncle Ron as she saw us putting our coats and boots on, but I convinced her it'd be fine and we weren't going too far, and that we'd be together. She went back to the living room to watch the movie without us while we all marched out into the cold snowstorm, following the footprints that were quickly filling in with new snow. The footprints led to the woods in the backyard. The deeper into the woods we got, the deeper the footprints were. We weren't sure if that was because less snow was falling to the ground under the trees, or because the footprints were fresher. We were following those footprints for a while, until finally, we saw where they were leading to. A cabin literally tucked away in the woods. It was dark inside though. No light was emitting from the windows. The footsteps led to the front door of the cabin, but we didn't dare go up to it. Instead, we crept over to the closest window to peer inside. It was too dark to see anything inside though, but we noticed it wasn't actually a glass window. It was just a screen. Then there were 2 thumps from inside of the cabin. And then the sound of something sliding. We didn't see what caused the sound though. Suddenly, one of my brothers screamed and pointed behind us. We turned to see a head poking out from another window of the cabin, but it was so dark all we could see was blackness, no features. Then the head disappeared from view as we heard rapid thumping sounds inside of the cabin, and then the front door to the cabin burst open. We all screamed and ran for our dear lives back in the direction of the house, following the footprints. I don't think we were actually chased though. The next day we tried taking our Uncle Ron on a hike to that cabin, but we couldn't for the lives of us find it. The creepiest thing to this day, we still live in the same house, and after all these years, we still never came across that cabin again. In fact, we can't even find it on maps or Google Earth. If it weren't for the fact that I was with my two brothers, I would question if this ever even happened. My friends, who I'll refer to as S and J, came along with me on a little camping trip near Blue Mountain National Park. We set up camp near a small pond just because it seemed like the coolest place to chill. The point of this whole trip was mainly just to get out, drink a bunch of beers with friends, and chill. I cracked open my second Budweiser, laughing it up with S and J, talking about some of our other friends with music playing in the background, overall just having a good time. Then, however, I saw S reach over for the speaker and turn it down all the way, and then shushed us and pointed out to the pond. S whispered, "Do you guys see that?" Jay and I looked out to the pond. The campfire had a glow that partially reflected on the pond water, but even yet, I couldn't see what he was pointing at. S whispered, "There's something in the water." I went into the tent to get the flashlight from my bag. When I came out, S said don't, but I turned it on anyway and aimed it at the pond. The light didn't reveal anything or anyone, but we did all hear the sound of water being pushed, as if someone or something were walking in it. I turned out the light just because I was freaked out and looked at my two friends, who were both wearing cringing faces. I told S to shut off the speakers completely now. We all sat in our chairs, not really saying much anymore, just listening to the surroundings. About an hour passed, and within that time, nothing happened, so we grew more comfortable again and things went back to normal. Eventually I went to my tent, and S and J went to the tent that they'd be sharing, and we all went to sleep. Now that I was alone with my thoughts, however, I started thinking of that thing that S said was in the water. He never actually described what it looked like, if it was an animal or a person. My sense of hearing was heightened as I was in a state of alert, and because of that, I heard something from the woods. I sat up, since that always seems to help with concentration. I needed to hear one more sound before I could confirm something wasn't right. There was the sound again, much closer now, and I was able to confirm it was a foot hitting the ground. Whether it was a person's foot or an animal's foot was still unclear, however. I heard another footstep, this time much closer. It was clear someone or something was sneaking around our campsite. There was one final footstep. It was really close to the tent. I started texting S, but I was only able to type out the words, "There's something," before the gut-wrenching, blood-curdling scream pierced through the walls of the tent. I couldn't tell if it was the scream of a man or a woman. It's hard to explain, but it was deep enough where it could be a man, but not so deep to the point that it couldn't be a woman. The scream lasted about 5 seconds. Then there was silence. I didn't know if I should get out, call for my friends, or stay silent. I texted S, "Dude, we have to run." He responded, "What was that?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I tried to think of what we could do. But pretty soon, S texted me again, saying the coast is clear, run for the car. I grabbed the keys from my bag, opened the zipper to the tent, and sprinted to the car, which luckily was only about 30 seconds away. We stayed in the car all night and went back the next morning for our stuff, which luckily was all still there. Still have no idea who, or even dare I say what that thing was at our campsite that night. Just happy we got out okay. Skipping most of the background of the story, I once found myself walking through the woods during a slight drizzle. All I had on me was my backpack with a spare pair of pants, a flashlight, a tripod and camera, and some granola bars. I'm a photographer and video editor, and I was recording footage of a forest during rain, a river during rain, and snagging some pictures as well. Long story short, I found myself lost, trying to find my car. It was the worst day of my life. I was panicking, stressed, screaming to myself in anger, just wanting to find the car. I'd say an hour after getting lost, I started to pick up on noises around me. I don't mean multiple noises at once. I mean at times I'd hear the same noise, just on different sides of me. The noise was footsteps, undeniably. I was starting to panic that I was being hunted by a bear. That was only at first, though. I slowed down to quiet my own footsteps so I would more likely hear where the other footsteps were, and when I did, I turned my head as quickly as possible in that direction. I saw half a person's body jumping behind a tree. Instead of calling out something or confronting them, I did what I still think was the smart thing. I walked away fast, playing it off like I didn't see him. It was starting to get darker every minute now, and the rain was still coming down lightly, but my heart was racing faster than ever. I checked my phone every 10 seconds and finally got one bar. I stopped walking, wiped the screen of rainwater, and opened maps first thing to find the nearest road, which was very close. I let out a sigh of relief, only to hear footsteps closing in on me from behind. I turned and spotted the person again. It was a man, and I know that in of itself doesn't sound so disturbing, just really sketchy, but I'm telling you, the sight was horrifying. I could only see the man briefly before he jumped behind a tree once again as if he thought I couldn't see him. But he looked huge. Really tall, average build, maybe a little overweight, jeans, and from what I could tell, a dark blue jacket with the hood up, half zipped down, exposing a white shirt underneath. He also had on glasses, but that's all I got of his face. He was hiding behind a tree maybe 15 feet away, and over the sound of millions of raindrops, all I heard was psst, psst. Now I ran. I didn't care anymore. I was borderline about to have a panic attack. I continued running when I found the road. I ran until I thought there was no chance of him catching up to me. Then I continued walking until I finally hitched a ride from a passing car, who took me back to where I was parked. I didn't bother mentioning what happened to the driver. I just told him I got lost is all. He went on his way as I got into my car and drove the half-hour trip back home, all the while reflecting on what just happened and my life.